They say an omega without a bond is a body without a soul. Tonight, in the great stone hall where alphas carved the fate of the frontier, Seren Vale learned what it meant to be less than nothing. The rejection didn't come with words. It came with silence, cold, deliberate, and public. While every other delegate was greeted, assessed, acknowledged, she sat at the table's forgotten edge like a mistake no one wanted to claim. Her pack had sent her as a formality. The summit's power brokers treated her as decoration. But they were about to learn something the frontier had already taught her. Survival makes you dangerous. If you want to see how a rejected omega brings the most powerful alphas to their knees, stay until the end. Drop a comment with your city and let me know you're watching. The Greywood Summit Hall smelled like old stone, pine smoke, and the particular tension that came from putting too many alphas in one room. Seren Vale sat at the massive circular table, hands folded on the scarred oak surface, spine perfectly straight, and tried not to feel like prey. She'd been sitting here for 3 hours. No one had spoken to her yet. Around the table, delegates from the major packs conducted the real business of the summit in low, assured voices, voices accustomed to being heard, to mattering, to shaping the future of the frontier territories. To her left, 2 alphas from the northern range discussed border adjustments and hunting rights without bothering to lower their tone, secure in the knowledge that their words carried weight. To her right, a senior beta from the Ironwood Collective reviewed territorial maps with the casual confidence of someone whose opinions shaped policy, whose recommendations became law. Seren's nameplate sat directly in front of her, Seren Vale, Hollow Creek Pack. The wood was newer than the others, the carving hastier, less refined, less permanent looking. An afterthought made physical. She didn't blame them for the oversight. Hollow Creek was barely a pack anymore. 63 wolves scattered across failing farmland and exhausted hunting grounds, clinging desperately to a name that had once meant something substantial. 3 generations ago, Hollow Creek had controlled prime territory, rich land, abundant water. Now they survived on stubbornness and fading memory. The only reason they'd been invited at all was tradition. Every recognized pack got a seat at the summit, even the dying ones. Especially the dying ones, their slow collapse served as a useful reminder to everyone else about what happened when you failed to adapt, failed to maintain power, failed to matter. Her alpha, Marcus Thorne, had made his expectations brutally clear before she left. You want to be useful for once in your miserable life? Go smile at the big packs and don't embarrass us. Maybe one of them will take pity and throw us a bone. Maybe some alpha will see something worth keeping. That's all you're good for, Vale. Looking pretty and keeping your mouth shut. So here she sat, smiling politely when anyone's gaze happened to drift past her. Not embarrassing anyone. Being useful in the only way Marcus thought she could be. Invisible. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd prepared for weeks, studying territorial disputes, resource distribution patterns, historical precedents. She'd memorized pack hierarchies, political alliances, trade agreements. She'd built detailed proposals for cooperative resource management based on Hollow Creek's own desperate experiments with survival. None of it mattered. No one was going to ask her opinion. The main doors opened with a resonant boom that cut through every conversation in the hall. All eyes turned as High Chancellor Voss entered, flanked by his inner circle. He was a massive alpha, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, moving through the room like a man who had never once in his entire life doubted his right to occupy space, to command attention, to be obeyed. Behind him came the rest of the summit's ruling body. Kara Wynn from the Stone Ridge Pack, cold and calculating, with eyes like winter ice and a reputation for destroying political enemies with surgical precision. Theron Black from Ember Crest, all easy charm and dangerous edges hidden behind a politician's smile that never quite reached his eyes, and half a dozen others whose names Seren knew only from the reports Marcus had forced her to memorize during the journey here. And then, walking through the doorway last, shoulders blocking out the light, came Aldrich Winters. Seren's breath caught in her throat despite her best efforts to remain composed. Aldrich Winters was the alpha of the largest pack coalition in the Southern Territories, a powerhouse alliance that controlled 3 river valleys and commanded the richest hunting grounds on the entire frontier. Dark-haired, broad-shouldered, carrying himself with the kind of absolute authority that made people step aside without conscious thought, that made lesser wolves drop their eyes instinctively. He moved like gravity itself bent toward him, like the world naturally arranged itself around his presence. She'd seen his picture before. Everyone had. But photographs didn't capture the reality of him, the weight, the presence, the sheer undeniable force of his existence. 6 months ago, Seren's pack had sent him a formal proposal, a marriage alliance, bonding documents signed and witnessed by Hollow Creek's entire council, offering a union between her pack and Winter's coalition. It had been Marcus's idea, desperate and transparent, but Seren had agreed because she understood the mathematics of survival. Her pack was dying, and political alliances were the only currency that mattered on the frontier. She'd been prepared to do her duty, to bond with a stranger if it meant her pack survived. She'd accepted that future with the same grim practicality she'd accepted everything else in her life. The proposal had been sent by official courier, proper documents, formal seals, a legitimate offer from one recognized pack to another. Aldrich Winters had never responded. Not a letter. Not a message. Not even a formal rejection that would have at least acknowledged they existed. Nothing. For 6 months, Hollow Creek had waited, hoped. Marcus had forbidden anyone from making contingency plans, convinced that Winters was simply taking his time, that the offer was being seriously considered. They'd put their future on hold, betting everything on a response that never came. Now, as Aldrich took his seat at the head of the table, of course he sat at the head. Where else would someone like him sit? His gaze swept across the assembled delegates in one smooth, assessing motion. That gaze passed directly over Seren without the slightest pause, without the smallest flicker of recognition, without even the basic acknowledgement you'd give a stranger. Not dismissal, not contempt, just absolute, complete nothing. Like she didn't exist. Like she'd never sent him a proposal, never offered herself, never waited 6 months for an answer that would never come. Seren kept her expression carefully neutral, years of practice keeping her face from showing what her chest was doing. She'd learned long ago, back when Hollow Creek first started failing and the blame started landing on anyone weak enough to carry it, not to let anyone see her bleed. High Chancellor Voss raised one hand, and the room settled into expectant silence with the efficiency of long-practiced ritual. "Welcome," Voss said, his voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the Great Hall without him needing to raise it. "To the 43rd Greywood Summit. We gather here as we always have, as our ancestors have gathered for generations, to negotiate in good faith, to resolve our conflicts with wisdom rather than violence, and to ensure the continued stability and prosperity of our territories." He paused, letting the weight of tradition and history settle over the assembly like a blessing. "This year, we face challenges that cannot be ignored, that cannot be postponed any longer without serious consequences. Resource scarcity across multiple territories, escalating border disputes that threaten to turn violent, the question of the eastern unclaimed lands, and the increasingly urgent matter of who has the right to settle them, to claim them, to control them." Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table, alphas nodding to each other, already forming the alliances and oppositions that would shape the coming debates. "Over the next 3 days," Voss continued, his tone turning more serious, more weighted, "we will address these issues with the gravity and seriousness they deserve. Every pack seated at this table has a voice here. Every legitimate concern will be heard and considered with the respect it merits. Every pack has a voice." Seren almost laughed out loud at the beautiful lie. She managed to keep it internal, but barely. Her nails dug into her palms under the table. The Chancellor took his seat with ceremonial dignity, and immediately, before Voss had even fully settled into his chair, Theron Black rose to his feet, smooth as oil, flashing that practiced, dangerous smile that had probably charmed and destroyed in equal measure. "Let's begin with the Eastern Territories," Theron said, his voice pitched to sound reasonable, collaborative, like he was simply opening a friendly discussion rather than making a power play. "Embercrest has been surveying the unclaimed lands for the past 8 months. We've invested significant resources in comprehensive mapping, detailed soil analysis, water source identification, and testing. We're fully prepared to begin settlement operations immediately, pending this council's approval, of course." Carowin leaned forward before Theron had even finished speaking, her voice cutting across the table like a blade through silk. "Settlement operations. That's an interesting euphemism, Theron. Creative. Is that what we're calling naked land grabs these days? I must have missed the memo updating our terminology." "It's not a land grab if no one else has bothered to claim it," Theron shot back, his smile never wavering but his eyes going cold and flat. "We're talking about territory that's been sitting empty for decades, unused, unwanted, Until suddenly, conveniently, the moment someone else shows initiative, everyone develops a passionate interest. Unwanted? Kara's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. Half the packs at this table want those lands, Theron. You know it. I know it. Everyone in this room knows it. You're just the first one arrogant enough, or desperate enough, to plant a flag and call it legitimate settlement. The argument built quickly after that, voices rising, territorial instincts flaring hot and immediate. Other alphas jumped in, taking sides, forming tactical alliances on the fly, old grudges and new opportunities mixing into something volatile. Within minutes, the careful diplomatic atmosphere Voss had tried to establish had shattered completely into something rawer, more honest, more dangerous. This was the real summit, not the polite speeches, not the formal procedures, but the brutal negotiation of power between wolves who'd rip out each other's throats if they thought they could get away with it. Seren watched it unfold with the detached clarity of someone observing a pattern they'd seen 100 times before. This wasn't actually about the Eastern territories at all. This was about dominance, about establishing hierarchy, about proving who could shout the loudest, push the hardest, force the room to bend to their will. The land was just an excuse, a stage for the real performance. She recognized every move because she'd watched Marcus play the same game in Hollow Creek's smaller councils, back when they still pretended to have influence, back before everyone admitted the truth. The difference was that these alphas were better at it, more practiced, more skilled, operating on a much larger stage with much higher stakes. No one looked at her. No one asked her opinion. No one even glanced in her direction to see if she might have something to contribute. She might as well have been furniture. Less than furniture. Furniture at least served a purpose. An hour passed, marked by the slow movement of light across the stone floor. Then another. The arguments circled and recycled, the same points made in slightly different words, alliances shifting by tiny degrees as alphas tested each other's positions, looking for weaknesses, seeking advantages. Seren's legs began to ache from sitting perfectly still for so long, from maintaining the rigid posture that Marcus had drilled into her. Her throat grew dry. She wanted water, but didn't want to draw attention by reaching for the pitcher that sat just out of comfortable reach. At one point, a server moved through the room with a fresh water pitcher, methodically filling glasses, moving from delegate to delegate with practiced efficiency. Every glass except hers. The server's eyes passed right over her, like she wasn't even there, like her empty glass was invisible, and moved on to the next delegate without breaking stride. Seren told herself it was an oversight, an honest mistake. The server was busy, distracted, focused on the important delegates. She knew it probably wasn't a mistake at all. By the time High Chancellor Voss finally raised his hand again, calling for order with obvious frustration, the light coming through the hall's high windows had shifted from afternoon gold to early evening amber, painting everything in shades of dying day. "Enough!" Voss declared, his voice cutting through the noise with the authority of someone who'd been managing alpha egos for decades. "We're going in circles, accomplishing nothing but giving ourselves headaches and wasting valuable time. Let's break for the evening and resume tomorrow morning with clearer heads and, hopefully, more productive attitudes. Dinner will be served in the formal dining hall in 1 hour." Chairs scraped against stone as delegates rose, already forming smaller clusters, continuing their debates in lower tones as they moved toward the exits. The real negotiations, Seren understood with perfect clarity, would happen over dinner in private rooms, over wine and carefully constructed casual conversations where the actual deals got made, where power really changed hands. She would not be invited to any of those conversations. She stayed seated, waiting for the room to empty before she risked standing up. It was safer that way. Less chance of being in someone's way, of committing some unintended breach of protocol, of drawing the wrong kind of attention. She'd learned that lesson early in life. When you had no power, the best strategy was to be invisible, to not remind anyone you existed. She was reaching for her papers, preparing to finally leave, when a voice spoke directly beside her. "You're from Hollow Creek." Seren looked up, genuinely startled. People didn't approach her. That wasn't how this worked. The man standing beside her section of the table was older, probably mid-40s, with steel gray threading liberally through dark brown hair and the kind of face that looked permanently tired in a way that suggested wisdom rather than weakness. Deep lines around his eyes spoke of years spent squinting at horizons, making difficult decisions, carrying heavy responsibilities, His posture was relaxed, unthreatening, hands visible and open. An alpha, she thought, reading the subtle signs in how he carried himself, but not one actively performing dominance for an audience. Yes, Seren said carefully, uncertain of his intention, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Seren Vale. Rowan Keir, he introduced himself, offering a slight nod of respect that absolutely shocked her. Alphas didn't nod to her. They looked through her. Riverbend Pack. Mind if I sit for a moment? My knees are protesting after 3 hours in that damn chair. She blinked, genuinely confused by this interaction, by his casual tone, by the simple fact that he was talking to her like she was a person. No, of course not. Please. Rowan pulled out the chair directly beside hers and sat down with a faint groan of relief, stretching his legs out under the table. 3 hours in these ancient chairs, and I'm ready to retire to a rocking chair on a porch somewhere quiet, he muttered, but there was warmth in his voice, almost humor, like he was sharing a joke rather than complaining. Then he looked at her directly, making actual eye contact in a way that felt almost aggressive in its honesty. You didn't say a single word during the entire session. Seren's stomach tightened defensively. Here it came. The criticism. The reminder that she was useless, that she was wasting everyone's time, that she should have stayed home. I didn't have anything meaningful to add to the discussion. Or no one gave you the space to add it, Rowan said, his tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory, stating a simple truth. I've been attending these summits for 15 years now. I know exactly how they work. The big packs talk. The small packs listen. Everyone pretends it's a democratic council, that every voice matters equally. It's a comfortable fiction we all maintain because admitting the truth would be too uncomfortable. Seren didn't know what to say to that level of brutal honesty, so she remained quiet, waiting to see where this conversation was actually heading, what he really wanted. Rowan studied her for a moment with those tired, intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than she was comfortable with. Hollow Creek's been struggling for a while now. I heard your water tables dropped significantly 2 years ago. Underground springs dried up. Yes, Seren admitted quietly. No point in denying what everyone already knew, what was probably common gossip among the major packs. We've been managing as best we can with what we have. Managing? Rowan repeated the word like he was tasting it, testing its weight and finding it wanting. That's a diplomatic way to say barely surviving. I respect the honesty hidden in the euphemism. Seren's jaw tightened slightly. She didn't need pity, especially not from a stranger, no matter how kind his intentions might appear to be. Pity was just another form of contempt dressed in gentler clothing. But when she looked at Rowan's expression more carefully, she didn't see pity there. She saw something else. Curiosity, maybe. Genuine interest. The look of someone actually thinking rather than making assumptions. What would you do? He asked suddenly, the question coming out of nowhere. If you were actually in charge of all this mess, if the decision was entirely yours to make, no politics, no pack pride, no history weighing you down, what would you do about all of this? He gestured vaguely toward the now empty debate floor, encompassing the whole chaotic afternoon in one motion. Seren hesitated. It felt like a trap, like some kind of test she didn't understand the parameters of, like he was setting her up for humiliation. But Rowan's expression remained open, honestly curious, genuinely interested in her answer, and something in her chest that had been locked tight for months, maybe years, slowly began to unclench. She thought about lying, about giving some safe, non-controversial answer that wouldn't make waves. Then she thought about Aldrich Winters walking past her like she didn't exist, and decided she had nothing left to lose. I'd stop fighting over the Eastern Territories, she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. Rowan's eyebrows rose with genuine surprise. That's a bold position to take, especially at a summit where that's literally the main topic of debate. It's a practical one, Seren continued, her voice growing steadier, more confident as she worked through the logic she'd been turning over in her mind for hours, for weeks, for the entire journey here. Everyone's fighting over land that no one has ever successfully settled in recorded history. The soil quality is demonstrably poor, the water sources are inconsistent at best and completely unreliable at worst, and it's too far from many established trade routes to make the investment worthwhile from an economic standpoint. But every pack sees it as a prize worth fighting for, worth potentially going to war over, because it's unclaimed, because claiming it would be a status symbol, a demonstration of power. She met his eyes directly, watching for his reaction. We're not suffering from a lack of land. We're suffering from a complete lack of coordination, from refusing to work together because cooperation looks like weakness. Go on, Rowan said quietly, leaning forward slightly, giving her his full attention in a way that felt almost uncomfortable in its intensity. If the packs actually worked together, implemented shared resource management systems, established rotating grazing rights that prevent overuse, created cooperative water access agreements that benefit everyone instead of hoarding resources, we could stabilize the territories we already control instead of constantly scrambling for more while what we currently have falls apart beneath us. The words were coming faster now, ideas she'd been developing for years finally finding voice. Hollow Creek shares our remaining water sources with 3 neighboring packs. We coordinate hunting to prevent depleting game populations. We trade crops and labor because none of us can survive alone anymore. It works. It's not perfect, but it works. And if it works on a small scale, it could work on a larger scale. Shared resources, Rowan said slowly, thoughtfully, turning the concept over in his mind. That means packs giving up autonomy, surrendering individual control. That's asking alphas to trust each other, and trust is in short supply in these territories. It means trading short-term pride for long-term survival, Seren corrected, her voice firm now, conviction replacing hesitation. It means recognizing that we're stronger together than we are separately tearing each other apart over scraps, while the real threats, climate change, resource depletion, economic instability, destroy us all. Pride doesn't keep your pack fed. Pride doesn't bring water to dry wells. Pride is a luxury dying packs can't afford. For a long moment, Rowan just looked at her, his expression unreadable, and Seren felt her brief surge of confidence begin to waver. She'd said too much, revealed too much, sounded desperate or naive or... Then, slowly, Rowan smiled. A real smile, genuine and warm, not the political mask she'd been seeing all day, not the predatory grins or calculating smirks. You've actually thought about this, he said, something like wonder in his voice. Really thought about it, worked through the details, considered the practicalities. This isn't just theory for you. I've lived it, Seren said simply, honestly. Hollow Creek doesn't have the luxury of pride anymore. We share resources with our neighbors, or we starve. Those are the only options. We learned cooperation or we died. Most of us chose cooperation. Rowan nodded slowly, something like respect crossing his features, transforming his tired face into something sharper, more focused. You should say this tomorrow, during the open session when delegates can propose new agenda items. Seren's pulse stuttered, anxiety spiking immediately, her earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. No one's going to listen to me. You saw that room. I'm from a dying pack. I have no influence, no allies, no credibility. They'll dismiss me before I finish my first sentence. Maybe, Rowan admitted with brutal honesty that somehow felt kinder than false reassurance. Probably, if I'm being realistic about how these things usually go. But I'll listen. And if the idea is good enough, if the logic is sound enough, if you present it clearly and back it with data, others will start listening too. That's how change actually happens in these councils. Not through dramatic moments, but one voice at a time, one convert at a time, until the momentum becomes impossible to ignore. He stood up, gathering his papers with practiced efficiency. Think about it, Seren Vale. You have a voice, whether you believe it or not. Whether anyone's told you that before. Might as well use it while you have the chance. He walked away before she could formulate a response, his footsteps echoing in the nearly empty hall, leaving her sitting alone at the massive table. Seren remained there for several minutes after he left, her heart beating too fast, her mind racing with possibilities and fears, and something that felt dangerously like hope. You have a voice. She'd spent the entire day being systematically invisible, treated like furniture, like decoration, like a waste of space. And now this stranger, this alpha from a pack she barely knew existed, thought she had something worth saying, thought people might actually listen. It was probably naive, probably wishful thinking, probably setting herself up for even worse humiliation than she'd already experienced. But as she finally gathered her things and headed toward the lodging wing, she couldn't stop replaying his words in her head, couldn't stop imagining standing up in that hall tomorrow, and actually speaking, actually being heard. You should say this tomorrow. Maybe she would. Or maybe she'd sit quietly and let the alphas tear each other apart like they always did, like they'd been doing for generations, while the frontier slowly died around them. Survival, after all, meant knowing when to speak and when to make yourself disappear. The lodging wing of the summit hall was divided strictly by status and rank, the hierarchy made physical in stone and space. The high-influence packs received private suites on the upper floors, spacious rooms with stone fireplaces, mountain views that stretched for miles, and enough space to conduct private meetings, to forge alliances, to plot strategy. The lesser packs, the smaller territories, the ones without real power or influence, got shared quarters on the ground level. Small, functional, forgettable. Seren's room was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a storage trunk. The single window looked out onto the utilitarian courtyard where supply wagons were parked in neat rows, where servants moved between buildings carrying linens and food, where the actual work of maintaining the summit happened out of sight of the important delegates. She didn't mind the view. She'd slept in worse places, under harder conditions, in rooms that leaked when it rained and froze solid in winter. This was luxury compared to some of the places Hollow Creek's poverty had taken her. She dropped her papers onto the bed and sat down heavily, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion she'd been holding back all day through sheer will. Her feet ached from the formal boots Marcus had insisted she wear. Too tight, too stiff, chosen for appearance rather than comfort. Her head throbbed from maintaining constant alertness, from monitoring every word, every expression, every subtle shift in the room's dynamics. The entire day felt like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe properly. She was reaching for her boots, ready to finally take them off, when a sharp knock on the door made her freeze mid-motion. She wasn't expecting anyone. No one here knew her well enough to visit. No one cared enough to seek her out after the day's session ended. Slowly, cautiously, she stood and crossed to the door, her heart already beating faster for reasons she couldn't quite name. She opened it. Aldrich Winters stood in the narrow hallway. Seren's breath stopped completely in her chest, trapped somewhere between her lungs and her throat. He looked different up close, taller, somehow more solid and real, sharper in ways that photographs and distant glimpses across the hall couldn't possibly capture. The kind of presence that made the air feel thinner, that made the small space of the hallway seem to shrink around his frame like the walls themselves were trying to accommodate him. His expression was completely unreadable, cold and controlled and giving away absolutely nothing. Like he'd spent years perfecting the ability to hide every thought, every feeling. Seren Vale, he said. Not a question. A confirmation, a statement of fact. Alpha Winters, she managed, her voice coming out steadier than she felt, than she had any right to feel, with her heart trying to hammer its way out of her chest. We need to talk. It wasn't a request. He stepped past her into the small room without waiting for permission, without asking, without acknowledging that this was her space, however temporary and insignificant. Alphas like Aldrich Winters didn't ask for space. They took it, and everyone else adjusted, moved, accommodated. Seren closed the door with hands that wanted to shake, her heart hammering against her ribs. About what? Aldrich turned to face her, arms crossing over his broad chest in a posture that might have been defensive on someone else, but on him just looked powerful, contained, coiled. About the proposal your pack sent to me 6 months ago. Seren's heart sank like a stone dropping into dark, cold water. So he had received it. He'd known about it all along. He'd just chosen not to respond, chosen to leave them hanging, waiting, hoping like desperate fools. I see, she said quietly, carefully, giving away nothing. I'm here to make something absolutely clear, Aldrich said, his tone flat and clinical, like he was discussing business contracts or territory boundaries rather than a person's worth, rather than crushing someone's last fragile hope. That proposal was never going to happen. Not 6 months ago, not now, not ever. Hollow Creek has nothing to offer my coalition. No resources worth mentioning, no political influence, no strategic value whatsoever. Your alpha sent that proposal out of pure desperation, and I ignored it out of basic courtesy. Courtesy, Seren repeated, the word tasting like ash and bile in her mouth. I didn't want to humiliate your pack with a formal written rejection that would become part of the official record, Aldrich continued, as if he were being generous, as if he were doing her some enormous favor that she should be grateful for. But since you're here at the summit, sitting at that table pretending you belong, I'll say it directly to your face, so there's absolutely no room for misunderstanding or false hope. I'm not interested in a bond with you. I'm not interested in any kind of alliance with Hollow Creek. And if your pack is sitting around waiting for me to change my mind, tell them to stop wasting their time. Tell them to find someone more appropriate to their station. His words were precise, measured, carefully chosen to cut without being overtly cruel. Clinical. Like he was evaluating livestock at market, not talking to a person, not crushing someone's dignity right in front of their eyes. Seren stood very still, drawing on every ounce of control she'd learned in years of surviving in a dying pack, years of being blamed for things outside her control, years of keeping her face blank while people who should have protected her tore her down instead. She'd been rejected before, by circumstance, by the harsh frontier, by the simple, cruel mathematics of fate and power. But this was different. This was personal. This was a man looking directly into her eyes and telling her, with perfect clarity and deliberate cruelty disguised as honesty, that she wasn't worth his time, that she had nothing to offer, that she was fundamentally and irreversibly beneath his consideration, that she was nothing. Understood, she said, her voice remaining steady despite the hollow, aching emptiness spreading through her chest like ice water through her veins. Aldrich studied her for a moment, his expression showing the faintest flicker of surprise, as if he'd expected more of a reaction. Tears, maybe. Begging, anger, humiliation. When she gave him nothing but calm acceptance, when she refused to break in front of him, he nodded once, sharp and final, like he was closing a ledger. Good. Then we won't have any misunderstandings going forward. You can focus on whatever reason your pack actually sent you here. He turned and walked to the door, his business concluded, ready to dismiss her from his mind as easily as he dismissed her from his consideration. He paused with his hand on the worn wooden handle. For what it's worth, he said without looking back at her, without meeting her eyes, you seem reasonably competent, presentable. You'd probably do better finding a stronger pack to align with, one more suited to your limited resources, better opportunities elsewhere than clinging to a sinking ship. Then he opened the door and left, closing it quietly behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a slam, more final than shouting. Seren stood completely alone in her small, cold room, staring at the space where he'd been standing, at the door that had closed between them with such terrible finality. You seem reasonably competent, like that was supposed to be a compliment, like he'd done her some enormous favor by rejecting her privately instead of publicly, by being honest instead of cruel. Like she should be grateful for his consideration, for his wisdom in recognizing that she wasn't good enough, that her pack wasn't strong enough, that they were beneath him. Like she should thank him for putting her in her place. She sat down slowly on the edge of the narrow bed, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. She wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger required energy, required heat, required the kind of fire that she'd learned long ago to bank and hide because expressing it only made things worse. She felt completely hollow instead. Empty. Like something vital had been carved out of her chest, and she was still waiting for the pain to catch up with the damage, for the reality to settle in. But somewhere deep beneath the numbness, beneath the aching emptiness, beneath the learned helplessness and practiced invisibility, something else was slowly building, something sharp and bright, and furiously, dangerously alive. Something that had been sleeping, dormant, waiting. He'd dismissed her. They'd all dismissed her, every single person in that hall today, with the exception of one tired alpha who'd bothered to ask her opinion. They'd looked at her and seen nothing. No threat, no value, no possibility, no future, just a waste of space from a dying pack, not even worth the courtesy of a formal rejection. Seren stood up slowly, walked to the small mirror hanging on the wall, and looked at her reflection. Same face she'd always had. Same brown eyes, same features that Marcus called adequate. Same person who'd spent years being told she wasn't enough, would never be enough, could never be enough. The same person who'd kept Hollow Creek's water distribution systems running when they'd started to fail. Who'd negotiated sharing agreements with 3 neighboring packs when Marcus had been too proud to admit they needed help. Who'd redesigned their crop rotation to squeeze every possible yield from exhausted soil. Who'd kept 63 wolves alive through 2 brutal winters when everyone said they should just give up and dissolve the pack. She hadn't done it for recognition. She'd done it because it needed to be done, because people were depending on her, because survival required someone to actually think instead of just posturing and hoping. Tomorrow, there would be an open session, a chance for delegates to propose new agenda items, to raise concerns, to shape the direction of the summit. Rowan Keir thought she should speak, thought she had something worth saying. Aldrich Winters thought she should know her place, thought she should accept her station and stop reaching for things above her. Seren looked at her reflection for a long moment, at the person she'd been and the person she might become, and made a decision. Tomorrow, she was going to stand up in front of that entire council, in front of every alpha who'd ignored her, every delegate who'd looked through her, every powerful pack that had dismissed her existence. She was going to speak, and she was going to prove every single one of them catastrophically, undeniably, irrevocably wrong. Not because she was angry, though the anger was building now, hot and bright. Not because she wanted revenge, though that would be sweet, but because she was right. Because her ideas could save lives, could prevent war, could actually fix the problems these alphas were too proud and too stupid to solve on their own. And because Aldrich Winters had just made the biggest mistake of his political career. He'd rejected her quietly, thinking she was nobody, thinking she'd just accept it and disappear. He'd underestimated her. They all had. Tomorrow, they'd learn what a mistake that was. Seren turned away from the mirror, sat down at the small desk, and began organizing her notes. She had work to do. A presentation to refine, an argument to make bulletproof. Outside her window, the sun was setting over the frontier, painting the mountains in shades of fire and blood. Tomorrow was going to change everything. Seren woke before dawn, her body responding to years of frontier habit where daylight was too precious to waste. The room was still dark, the stone walls cold enough that her breath misted faintly in the air. She dressed quickly, fingers fumbling slightly with the buttons, nerves, not cold, and gathered the notes she'd refined until past midnight. Her plan was simple. Possibly suicidal, but simple. Get to the hall early. Request time during the open session. Present her proposal before anyone could stop her. The hard part would be everything that came after. She made her way through the empty corridors, her footsteps echoing off stone. The summit hall was deserted at this hour, the great circular table sitting like a judgment waiting to be passed. Morning light was just beginning to filter through the high windows, turning everything gray and uncertain. Seren found the session coordinator's office tucked into a side corridor. The door was closed but unlocked. She knocked anyway. "It's open," a tired voice called. Inside, a middle-aged woman sat behind a desk covered in papers, a cup of something hot steaming beside her hand. She looked up with the expression of someone who'd been working since before the sun thought about rising. "I need to register for the open session," Seren said, "to propose a new agenda item." The woman, her nameplate read Miriam Chen, session coordinator, studied her for a moment. "You're with?" "Hollow Creek Pack. Seren Vale." Something shifted in Miriam's expression. Not quite pity, but close. "The open session can get contentious. You sure you want to put yourself out there?" "I'm sure." Miriam pulled out a registry, running her finger down a list. "You'd be 7th in the queue. Topics are limited to 5 minutes, strictly enforced. Chancellor Voss doesn't tolerate grandstanding." "Understood." "Name and proposed topic?" Seren hesitated for just a heartbeat. Once she said this out loud, once it went into the official record, there was no taking it back. Seren Vale, Hollow Creek Pack. Topic: Cooperative Resource Management as an Alternative to Territorial Expansion. Miriam's pen stopped moving. She looked up. "That's going to make some people very unhappy." "I know. You'll be challenging the entire premise of the Eastern Territories debate. Every major pack has a stake in that land. They're not going to appreciate some..." She caught herself, but the unspoken word hung in the air anyway. "Nobody." "I know," Seren repeated, quieter this time. Miriam studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly and wrote down the information. "You're registered. Session starts at 9. Don't be late." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Miriam said. "You might regret this before lunch." By the time delegates began filtering into the hall, Seren had claimed the same seat as yesterday, her nameplate still marking her designated spot at the table's edge. She arranged her notes carefully, organizing them more for something to do with her hands than because they needed organizing. Rowan Keir arrived early, nodding to her as he took his seat several places down. The acknowledgement felt like an anchor in a shifting sea. Then the major packs arrived. Cara Wynne, cold and assessing. Theron Black, flashing smiles that never reached his calculating eyes. Others whose names she'd memorized, whose territorial holdings she could recite, whose political alliances she'd mapped like terrain. And finally, Aldrich Winters. He walked past her exactly as he had yesterday. No recognition, no acknowledgement, nothing. Like last night's conversation in a room had never happened, like she'd already been dismissed from his mind completely. Good. Let him be surprised. High Chancellor Voss called the session to order promptly at 9, his voice cutting through the morning chatter with practiced authority. We'll begin with updates on yesterday's discussions, he announced, then move to the open session for new proposals. I remind everyone that we're here to find solutions, not to score political points. Keep your arguments productive. The first hour dissolved into the same territorial posturing as yesterday. Theron and Cara traded barbs over the eastern lands. An alpha from the Western Ridge Pack proposed a survey commission that everyone immediately began arguing about. Two smaller packs got into a heated exchange over hunting rights that had nothing to do with the summit's stated agenda. Seren watched the clock, her pulse steadily climbing. Finally, Voss raised his hand for silence. Open session, 7 items on the register, 5 minutes each, no exceptions. First up, he consulted his notes. Alpha Morrison, Northern Range Pack, regarding water rights in the disputed corridor. Morrison stood and launched into a prepared speech about historical claims and treaty violations. Seren barely heard it. She was mentally rehearsing her opening, adjusting her arguments, anticipating objections. The second speaker proposed a trade agreement. The third wanted to revisit boundary definitions from a treaty signed 30 years ago. The fourth suggested a joint military training exercise that was obviously about showing off strength rather than actual cooperation. Then Voss looked at his list again. Fifth item, Seren Vale, Hollow Creek Pack. He paused, clearly seeing the topic for the first time. His eyebrows rose slightly. Regarding cooperative resource management as an alternative to territorial expansion. The room went very quiet. Seren stood, her legs steadier than she'd expected. Every eye in the hall turned toward her, some curious, most dismissive, a few actively hostile. Thank you, Chancellor. Her voice carried clearly, years of speaking over wind and weather on the frontier, giving it projection she hadn't known she possessed. I'll be brief. Please do, Voss said, his tone neutral, but his expression skeptical. Seren took a breath and began. We're fighting over the eastern territories because we see them as the solution to our resource problems. More land equals more resources equals more stability. It's a simple equation that makes intuitive sense. She paused, letting that sink in. It's also wrong. Muttering rippled around the table. Seren pressed forward before anyone could interrupt. The eastern territories have poor soil, unreliable water, and no existing infrastructure. Successfully settling them would require massive investment with uncertain returns. Meanwhile, the territories we already control are experiencing resource depletion because we manage them independently, inefficiently, competitively. She pulled out her first sheet of notes, the data she'd spent weeks compiling. In the past 5 years, 7 packs have reported significant drops in game populations. 9 have experienced water table issues. 12 have seen crop yields decline despite favorable weather. We're not lacking land, we're mismanaging what we have. That's a bold accusation, Cara Wynne said, her voice sharp as a blade. Are you suggesting we don't know how to manage our own territories? I'm suggesting that independent management creates systemic inefficiency, Seren replied, meeting Cara's cold gaze directly. When every pack hunts the same migratory herds without coordination, we deplete them faster than they can recover. When we all draw from connected water sources without communication, we don't notice problems until they're crises. When we compete for the same trade routes instead of cooperating, we all pay higher costs. Theron Black leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. So your solution is what? We all hold hands and share? That's naive even by small pack standards. My solution is structured cooperation, Seren said, refusing to rise to the bait. Rotating hunting rights that allow game populations to recover. coordinated water monitoring and distribution, shared trade infrastructure that reduces costs for everyone. It's not idealism. It's practical resource management based on data rather than pride. Based on your pack's experience, you mean? Another alpha interjected. Marcus Venn from Eastmarch. Hollow Creek shares resources because you have no choice. You're desperate. That doesn't make it a model for successful packs. The words stung because they were partially true. Seren felt heat rising in her chest but kept her voice level. Hollow Creek shares resources because we learned that survival requires adaptation. Yes, we were forced into it. But the result is that we've stabilized our situation using a fraction of the resources any single pack would need operating independently. Our model works precisely because we had no choice but to make it work. This is a waste of time, Aldrich Winters said suddenly, his voice cutting through the discussion like a judge's gavel. We're here to discuss legitimate territorial policy, not listen to failed packs justify their weakness as strategy. The casual cruelty in his tone, the easy dismissal, hit Seren like a physical blow. She saw several delegates nodding in agreement, ready to move on, to dismiss her exactly as he'd dismissed her last night. Something inside her snapped, not broke, snapped into focus. You're right that Hollow Creek failed, she said, her voice harder now, edged with something that made several alphas sit up straighter. We failed to maintain our water sources, failed to keep our population stable, failed to hold on to power and influence. We failed at everything this council values. She paused, letting the admission hang in the air. But we succeeded at surviving, and right now survival is going to matter more than pride. Is that a threat? Kara Wynn asked, her eyes narrowing. It's a prediction, Seren replied. The resource depletion I mentioned isn't speculation, it's measured data. Game populations are down 30% across the frontier in 5 years. Water tables are dropping, trade costs are rising. These are facts, not opinions. She pulled out another sheet, specific numbers she'd gathered from public records. At current rates of consumption and current efficiency levels, 12 packs will face critical resource shortages within 3 years. Not Hollow Creek, we're already there. I'm talking about major packs. Powerful packs. Packs currently fighting over eastern territories that won't save them. The room had gone quiet again, but it was a different quality of silence now. Uneasy. Uncertain. You're fear-mongering, Theron said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. I'm reading you the data that's already in the public record, Seren countered. Information any of you could access if you bothered to look past your own borders. The Eastern Territories are a distraction, a prize that will cost more than it's worth while the real crisis develops in the territories we're ignoring. And your proposal is that we just cooperate? Marcus Venn's skepticism dripped from every word. Trust our competitors with our resources? That's not how power works. Power is about to stop working the way you think it does, Seren said quietly. When resources run out, having the biggest territory means having the biggest crisis. Cooperation isn't weakness. Right now, it's the only thing that will keep this frontier from collapsing. Rowan Keir spoke for the first time, his tired voice carrying unexpected weight. I'd like to hear specifics. How would this cooperation actually function? Seren felt a surge of gratitude that she channeled immediately into focus. 3-tier structure. First tier, information sharing. Coordinated monitoring of water, game, crops. Early warning systems so problems get caught before they become disasters. Second tier, resource coordination. Rotating hunting territories, shared water access agreements, cooperative trade routes. Third tier, joint infrastructure investment, shared storage facilities, collective grain reserves, mutual aid agreements for crisis situations. That requires giving up sovereignty, Kara said flatly. It requires acknowledging interdependence, Seren corrected. We're already interdependent, we just pretend we're not. The same river system flows through 6 territories. The same herds migrate through 8. The same trade routes connect all of us. We can manage those connections intelligently, or we can keep pretending we're independent while we all slowly fail. Who controls this cooperation? Aldrich asked, his tone making it clear he already considered the question fatal to her proposal. Who makes decisions? Who enforces agreements? You're proposing we surrender our autonomy to some council that will inevitably be dominated by the largest packs. I'm proposing we create a resource management cooperative governed by proportional representation and majority vote, Seren replied, her response immediate and precise. Each pack gets representation based on population and territorial size, but decisions require majority consensus. No single pack controls it. Everyone has incentive to make it work because everyone benefits, and everyone suffers if it fails.
That's never going to happen, Theron said with finality. You're asking alphas to trust each other with their pack's survival.
That's not just naive, it's dangerous.
What's dangerous is continuing down the current path, Seren shot back.
You want the Eastern Territories? Fine, fight over them. Invest resources you don't have into land that won't save you. But when your water runs out and your people start starving and you finally admit that pride doesn't keep wolves alive, where are you going to turn?
Because Hollow Creek figured out the answer years ago and will still be here, barely surviving but still breathing,
while your mighty territories collapse. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Aldrich stood abruptly, his chair scraping against stone. This is absurd. We're wasting time on fever dreams from a pack that's already failed. I move to table this discussion and return to actual policy.
Seconded, Kara said immediately.
Voss looked at Seren, something unreadable in his expression.
Any objection to tabling?
This was it. The moment where her voice either mattered or disappeared forever.
Yes, Seren said clearly. I object.
Voss's eyebrows rose.
On what grounds?
On the grounds that you asked for solutions, and I'm offering one. On the grounds that dismissing it without discussion proves you're more interested in maintaining power structures than solving actual problems. On the grounds that if this council can't even have a conversation about cooperation, then we're already too far gone to save. The challenge hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Voss studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled, small and grim, but genuine. Bold words from Hollow Creek. Very well. Discussion will continue. Anyone else wish to speak on this proposal? Rowan raised his hand. Riverbend Pack supports further exploration of this concept. At minimum, it deserves serious analysis rather than immediate dismissal. A younger alpha from a mid-sized pack Seren didn't know well spoke up, hesitantly. Greythorn Pack has experienced the water table issues mentioned. We'd be interested in cooperative monitoring, at least. Another voice. Pine Ridge has hunting concerns. Maybe coordination makes sense. Not a majority, not even close, but enough voices that the proposal couldn't be completely buried. Aldrich's jaw tightened visibly. This is a distraction from real policy. We have actual territorial issues to resolve.
Then let's vote, Seren said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Formal vote on whether to establish a working committee to study cooperative resource management. If it fails, I'll drop it entirely. If it passes, we develop an actual proposal for the next summit. Either way, we stop wasting time arguing in circles.
Voss looked around the table,
gauging reactions. That's actually reasonable. All in favor of establishing an exploratory committee.
Hands went up. Rowan's immediately. The Greythorn Alpha, Pine Ridge. 3 others Seren didn't immediately recognize. Opposed? More hands, Aldrich's, Kara's, Theron's, the major powers voting as a block. Voss counted carefully. 14 in favor, 16 opposed, motion fails. Seren's chest tightened. So close. Not enough, but close enough to prove she wasn't completely delusional. However, Voss continued, and something in his tone made everyone pay attention, the level of support suggests this isn't entirely without merit. I'm establishing an informal working group to examine resource management options. Participation voluntary. Report back at the next session with preliminary findings. Seren Vale will coordinate. He looked at her directly. Congratulations, you just volunteered yourself for a lot of work. It wasn't what she'd hoped for, but it was something. A crack in the wall, small but real. Thank you, Chancellor, she managed. Aldrich stood again. With respect, Chancellor, this sets a dangerous precedent. We're legitimizing fringe proposals from minor packs. We're exploring policy options, Voss corrected, his tone allowing no argument. That's what this summit exists to do. If you're threatened by examining alternatives, perhaps you should ask yourself why. The rebuke was gentle but unmistakable. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. Aldrich's expression went completely cold. He looked at Seren, and the contempt in his eyes was absolute. You'll regret this, he said quietly. Not a threat, a promise. Then he walked out of the hall, the door slamming behind him with enough force to echo. Seren stood frozen, suddenly aware that every eye in the room was on her. Some curious, some calculating, some hostile. She'd just made an enemy of the most powerful alpha on the frontier, and somehow, despite the fear climbing her spine, despite knowing she'd probably just signed Hollow Creek's death warrant, she felt more alive than she had in years. The session dissolved into chaos after that. Delegates broke into clusters, arguing in heated whispers. Some approached Seren directly, Rowan first, offering quiet support and practical advice about forming the working group. The Greythorn Alpha introduced herself as Elena and promised actual data about water issues. Pine Ridge sent a beta to discuss hunting coordination logistics, but others made their hostility clear. Marcus Venn walked past her without acknowledgement, as if she'd ceased to exist. Carowin shot her a look that could freeze blood. Theron Black smiled at her, which was somehow worse than anger, and said, "Brave speech. Hope you survive the consequences." By the time the hall cleared, Seren's hands were shaking. Adrenaline crash, she told herself. Just adrenaline. She was gathering her notes when footsteps approached. She looked up to find Miriam Chen, the session coordinator, watching her with an expression caught somewhere between respect and concern. "That was either the bravest thing I've seen at a summit," Miriam said quietly, "or the stupidest. Possibly both." "Which do you think it was?" Seren asked. "Ask me after you survive the next 48 hours. Miriam handed her a folder. Working group roster, names of everyone who expressed interest, plus contact information. You'll need to schedule meetings, coordinate data collection, prepare preliminary findings. Chancellor expects a report in 2 days. Seren took the folder, feeling its weight. 2 days? He's testing you, seeing if you're serious or just grandstanding. Fail to deliver, and this all goes away. Succeed. Miriam shrugged. Well, things might get interesting. They're already interesting. This is just the beginning, Miriam said. You challenge the power structure. They're not going to let that stand without a fight. Watch your back, Vale. Some fights happen in council halls. Others happen in dark corridors. She walked away before Seren could ask what that meant. Seren stood alone in the empty hall, clutching her folder of names, and felt the full weight of what she'd just done settle over her shoulders. She'd asked for a voice. She'd gotten one. Now she had to figure out how to survive having it. The afternoon sun slanted through the high windows, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. Somewhere in this building, Aldrich Winters was planning how to destroy her. Somewhere, Carowin and Theron Black were calculating how to turn this to their advantage. Somewhere, Marcus Thorne was probably getting drunk and cursing her name for making Hollow Creek a target. Seren looked down at the folder in her hands. 14 packs had voted against her, but 7 had voted for her. 7 packs thought cooperation was worth exploring. 7 voices that hadn't existed yesterday. It wasn't victory, but it was a beginning. She tucked the folder under her arm and headed for the door. She had 2 days to prove she wasn't crazy. 2 days to build something that could change everything. 2 days before the Frontier's power structure crushed her completely. Or before she proved that even rejected Omegas from dying packs could reshape the world. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and Seren Vale walked into an uncertain future with her head held high and her hands still shaking. Behind her, in the empty hall, her nameplate sat on the table where it had always been. But tomorrow, it would mean something different. Tomorrow, people would know her name. The corridor outside the hall was empty, which should have been Seren's first warning. Summit sessions usually ended with clusters of delegates continuing their arguments, forming alliances, making deals. The silence felt wrong. She was halfway to her room when she heard footsteps behind her, too fast, too deliberate. She turned. 3 betas she didn't recognize blocked the corridor. Not threatening, exactly, just positioned in a way that made it clear she wasn't going anywhere without their permission. Seren Vale? The lead one asked, though his tone made it obvious he already knew. Yes. You need to come with us. Someone wants to talk to you. Her pulse kicked up. Who? Someone who doesn't like being refused. Seren's mind raced through options. She could scream, but the corridor was deserted and these were summit grounds. Whoever sent them had enough influence to ensure no one would interfere. She could run, but where? Her room wasn't safe. The hall was empty. And if I say no? She asked, keeping her voice steady. The beta smiled without warmth. Then we'll carry you. Your choice, how dignified this is. She thought about Aldrich's cold promise. You'll regret this. Lead the way, she said. They walked her through parts of the summit complex she hadn't seen, older corridors, stone darker and older, away from the main facilities. Eventually, they stopped at a heavy wooden door. The lead beta knocked twice, then opened it and gestured for her to enter. The room beyond was clearly designed for private negotiations. Large table, comfortable chairs, no windows. And sitting at the head of that table, looking like he owned not just the room but the entire building, was Aldrich Winters, alone. The door closed behind her with a sound like a cell locking. Sit, Aldrich said. Not quite a command, but close enough. Seren remained standing. Your people didn't give me much choice about coming here. I'll stand. Something flickered in his expression, surprise maybe, that she wasn't immediately compliant. Suit yourself. This won't take long. What do you want? Aldrich stood, moving around the table with predatory grace. He was taller than her by nearly a foot, broader, radiating the kind of physical presence that made people's instincts scream alpha, dominant, dangerous. He stopped just close enough to be intimidating without quite being threatening. I want you to understand the position you've put yourself in, he said quietly. That performance in the hall today? That was clever, even brave, in a reckless sort of way, but it was also spectacularly stupid. Is there a point to this? Seren asked, refusing to step back, refusing to show the fear climbing her spine. The point is that you've made yourself a problem, Aldrich continued. You challenged the established order. You embarrassed powerful people. You made them look short-sighted in front of the entire summit. That has consequences. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality. His voice was perfectly calm, which somehow made it worse. You're from a dying pack with no influence, no resources, no protection. You just painted a target on your back, and now people are going to aim at it, starting with me. Seren's hands clenched at her sides. Because I proposed cooperation? Because I suggested we work together instead of fighting over scraps? Because you challenged me specifically, Aldrich said, and now there was heat in his voice, carefully controlled but present. You made me look weak in front of the council. You, an omega from nowhere, made an alpha of my standing appear small and petty. That's not something I can let stand. So this is about your pride. This is about power, he corrected, about maintaining the hierarchy that keeps the frontier stable. You don't understand how things work here, Vale. The strong lead, the weak follow. It's not cruel. It's necessary. Without that structure, everything collapses into chaos. And cooperation threatens that structure. Cooperation creates dependency, Aldrich said. It makes strong packs vulnerable to weak ones. It rewards failure and punishes success. Your model might work for Hollow Creek because you have nothing to lose. But packs like mine, we built our strength through competition, through taking what we needed, through being better than everyone else. I'm not going to surrender that to some idealistic fantasy about working together. Seren felt something cold settle in her chest. You didn't bring me here to explain your philosophy. No. Aldrich's expression hardened. I brought you here to make you an offer. Withdraw your proposal. Dissolve your working group. Publicly acknowledge that you spoke out of turn and don't have the experience to advise on frontier policy. Do that, and I'll ensure Hollow Creek receives favorable trade terms, enough to stabilize your situation, maybe even grow a little. You get to go home looking like you helped your pack. And if I refuse, then I destroy you, Aldrich said simply. I have alliances with 16 packs represented at this summit. Within a week, Hollow Creek will find its trade routes blocked, its territory encroached on, its resources cut off. Within a month, your pack will be begging to dissolve and join someone else's territory as subordinates. Within 6 months, the name Hollow Creek will be a footnote in frontier history. The casual certainty in his voice made it clear this wasn't a bluff. He could do exactly what he was describing, and they both knew it. You'd destroy an entire pack because I embarrassed you? Seren asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I'd destroy a pack to maintain order, Aldrich corrected. To send a message that challenging the established hierarchy has consequences. It's nothing personal, Vale, it's just how power works. Seren stood very still, her mind racing. Everything he was saying made a sick kind of sense. He had the influence to make good on his threats. Hollow Creek was vulnerable, barely surviving already. One coordinated effort from the major packs would finish them. And all she had to do to prevent it was surrender, admit she was wrong, go back to being invisible. How long do I have to decide? She asked. Until tomorrow's session, Aldrich said. Stand up and withdraw or watch everything you care about burn. Your choice. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. For what it's worth, I meant what I said yesterday. You're competent. Under different circumstances, with a different pack, you might have actually been worth my time. But you're not. And this frontier doesn't have room for people who don't know their place. He left, closing the door behind him. Seren stood alone in the private negotiation room, shaking with a combination of fear and fury, so intense she thought she might be sick. He was right about the power dynamics, right about Hollow Creek's vulnerability, right about his ability to destroy everything she cared about. But he was wrong about one thing. She knew exactly what her place was, and she was done accepting it. The working group meeting was scheduled for that evening in one of the smaller conference rooms. Seren arrived early, her mind still churning through Aldrich's ultimatum, and found Rowan Keir already there reviewing papers. He looked up as she entered. You look like you've been through something. Just a productive conversation about power dynamics, Seren said, trying to keep her voice light and failing. Rowan's expression sharpened. Someone got to you already. Let me guess. Winters? How did you know? Because he's predictable. Rowan set down his papers. He sees your proposal as a direct threat to his coalition's dominance. Of course, he's going to try to shut you down before you build any real momentum. He threatened to destroy Hollow Creek if I don't withdraw. And he can probably do it, Rowan said bluntly. His coalition controls enough trade and territory to strangle a small pack. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Seren sank into a chair. I don't know. If I withdraw, I save my pack, but prove him right. That power is all that matters. That cooperation is impossible. If I continue, I'm gambling 63 lives on a proposal that might not even work. That's not quite the choice you're facing, Rowan said quietly. The real question is whether you believe your proposal can actually help the frontier, or if it's just a desperate gamble from a dying pack. Seren looked at him sharply. You think I'm wrong? I think you're partially right, which is more dangerous than being completely wrong. Rowan pulled out a folder thick with documents. I've been doing this long enough to recognize when someone's speaking from genuine analysis versus desperation. Your data is solid. Your logic is sound. Your proposal addresses real problems that the major packs are ignoring because acknowledging them would mean admitting vulnerability. He paused. But you're also naive about implementation. You're assuming rational actors will choose cooperation over competition when they see the data. That's not how politics works. So I should give up? I'm saying you need to be smarter. Rowan leaned forward. Aldrich threatened you because direct confrontation is his strength. He's bigger, more powerful, more connected. If you fight him on his terms, you lose. So don't fight on his terms. Before Seren could ask what he meant, the door opened and other delegates began arriving. Elena from Greythorn bringing detailed water table measurements. A beta from Pine Ridge named Kara with hunting data. 2 representatives from smaller packs Seren barely knew. By the time everyone settled, they had 8 people. Not the full roster of interested packs, but enough to work with.
Thank you all for coming, Seren began, standing at the head of the table and feeling absurdly like she was playing at being someone important. I know this is voluntary and probably politically risky, so I appreciate you being here. Let's skip the pleasantries, Elena said, not unkindly. We're here because we have real problems, and the major packs are too busy fighting over new territory to notice. What's the actual plan?
Seren pulled out her notes, grateful for the directness. 2 days to produce preliminary findings for Chancellor Voss. I'm proposing we focus on 3 areas where cooperation shows immediate, measurable benefits: water management, hunting coordination, and grain reserves. If we can demonstrate proof of concept in even one area, it becomes harder to dismiss as idealistic fantasy. Kara from Pine Ridge nodded. We've got hunting data showing herd depletion. If we can model what coordinated hunting would look like versus current practices, that's concrete. Greythorn has water measurements going back 15 years, Elena added. We can show the decline and project what happens if current consumption continues versus a managed system. They worked for 3 hours comparing data, building models, arguing over methodology. Seren found herself in her element. This was what she'd been doing for Hollow Creek for years, just on a larger scale. Finding efficiencies, identifying patterns, making desperate resources stretch further than anyone thought possible. Around 9 o'clock, Rowan called for a break. People stood, stretching, a few heading out to find food. Seren was reviewing the water projections when someone cleared their throat behind her. She turned to find a young alpha she didn't recognize, mid-20s, nervous energy, from one of the packs she'd never heard of. Seren Vale? I'm Daniel Cross from Birchwood Pack. I wasn't at the session today, but I heard about your proposal. And? Seren asked, wary of another confrontation. I think you're right, Daniel said in a rush. Birchwood is small, maybe 60 wolves, and we've been struggling for 3 years. We started sharing resources with our neighbors last year because we had no choice, and it saved us. But when I tried to bring it up at previous summits, I was laughed out of the room. Someone from a pack like yours actually getting people to listen, actually building something official, it matters.
Thank you, Seren said, surprised by the genuine gratitude in his voice. That means a lot. I brought data too, if you want it, Daniel continued, pulling out a folder. Crop yields, resource sharing agreements, survival rates before and after cooperation. It's not comprehensive, but it's real-world evidence. Seren took the folder, flipping through pages of careful documentation. This is excellent. Why didn't you bring this to the session yourself?
Daniel laughed without humor. Because I'm from a pack nobody's heard of, and I'm barely 25. They'd have dismissed me even faster than they tried to dismiss you. At least you got them to create a working group. That's further than anyone's gotten before. After Daniel left, Seren sat with his folder, a strange feeling building in her chest. She'd been so focused on Aldrich's threats, on the major pack's opposition, that she hadn't fully registered the smaller voices supporting her. The packs who were struggling, who'd been invisible just like she was, who saw her proposal not as a threat, but as a lifeline. Rowan appeared beside her. Gathering allies? Gathering evidence, Seren said. But yes, I didn't realize how many smaller packs were in similar situations. There are more of us than there are of them, Rowan said quietly. The major packs are louder, but the frontier is mostly made up of small and mid-sized territories. If you could organize them, build a real coalition of lesser packs, he trailed off meaningfully. That would threaten the entire power structure, Seren finished. Exactly. Which is why Aldrich is trying to crush you now, before you realize what you could build. Seren looked at the data spread across the table, evidence from a dozen struggling packs, all showing the same pattern. Competition was killing them. Cooperation kept them alive. What do you think will happen if I don't withdraw? She asked Rowan directly. Honestly? War. Rowan's tone was grim. Not immediately, but Aldrich will make good on his threats against Hollow Creek. Other major packs will see it as an opportunity to grab territory from weakened neighbors. Within a year, the frontier will be an open conflict over resources that are running out anyway. Your proposal threatens the established order, but the established order is already failing. We're just watching it die slowly instead of admitting it. So what do I do? You make a choice, Rowan said. Safety or significance. You can withdraw, save Hollow Creek, and watch the frontier collapse over the next decade while staying safely invisible. Or you can push forward, risk everything, and maybe, just maybe, build something that actually changes things before it's too late. Those are terrible options. Welcome to leadership, Rowan said with a tired smile. It only gets worse from here. Whoa. Seren didn't sleep that night. She sat at the small desk in her room, working through the data her working group had compiled, building the preliminary report that Voss had requested. The numbers were damning. Water tables dropping across 12 territories, game populations declining in 15, crop yields falling in 9. The frontier was dying, and everyone was too busy fighting over what remained to notice the foundation crumbling beneath them. Around 3 a.m, she heard footsteps in the corridor outside her room. Slow, deliberate, stopping right outside her door. She froze, listening. A piece of paper slid under her door. Footsteps retreated. Seren waited a full minute before approaching the paper. It was a single sheet, handwritten in sharp, precise script. Withdraw or die. This is your only warning. Tomorrow we stop asking nicely. No signature, no identifying marks. Seren stared at the note, her hands trembling. Not from fear, though she was afraid, but from rage. Pure, incandescent rage at the casual threat, at the assumption that she'd simply fold, at the entire power structure that thought intimidation was a legitimate governing strategy. She walked to the small fireplace, struck a match, and burned the note. Then she went back to her report and kept working. The next morning's session started exactly as scheduled. Seren arrived early, her report completed, her decision made. She saw Aldrich watching her from across the hall, his expression unreadable, waiting to see if she'd surrender. She took her seat and organized her papers. Chancellor Voss called the session to order. We have several items on today's agenda, but first, the working group on resource management. Seren Vale, you have preliminary findings? This was it. The moment where she either stepped back into invisibility or burned every bridge she had. Seren stood, feeling every eye in the room track the movement. I do, Chancellor. The working group met yesterday and compiled data from 14 packs across the frontier. The findings are concerning. She distributed copies of the report, detailed projections, hard numbers, evidence that couldn't be easily dismissed. Several delegates began reading immediately, expressions darkening as they absorbed the data. The summary is this, Seren continued. At current consumption rates and management practices, we're facing systematic resource collapse within 5 years. Not speculation. Measured trends with mathematical projections. Water tables are dropping at an average rate of 8% annually across affected territories. Game populations are declining by 6% per year. Crop yields are down by 12% over 3 years, despite favorable weather. These numbers are exaggerated, Aldrich interrupted. Fear-mongering designed to justify a radical proposal. These numbers are from public records, Seren shot back. Your own coalition's territory reports show water table decline. Embercrest's hunting records show game depletion. Stone Ridge's agricultural data shows yield drops. It's all there in the appendices, sourced and documented. Kara Wynne was flipping through the report, her expression troubled. These projections assume continuation of current practices. What changes if we increase efficiency? Individual efficiency helps, but doesn't solve the systemic problem, Seren replied. The issue isn't how much each pack consumes. It's that we're all drawing from connected systems without coordination. 6 packs hunting the same migratory herd, 8 territories pulling from the same aquifer, 15 packs competing for the same trade routes. Individual efficiency just means the collapse takes longer. Theron Black leaned back in his chair. So your solution is still cooperation. My solution is survival, Seren said. Cooperation is just the mechanism. The alternative is fighting over shrinking resources until everyone's too weak to fight anymore. Maybe the strongest packs survive that. Maybe none of us do. This is precisely the kind of alarmist rhetoric I warned about, Aldrich said, standing. His voice was controlled, but his eyes were cold with fury. Vale is manufacturing a crisis to justify surrendering our autonomy. I'm presenting data, Seren interrupted, and the sheer audacity of cutting off an alpha of Aldrich's status sent a ripple of shock through the room. If you disagree with the projections, challenge the methodology. If you think the sources are wrong, identify which ones and why. But don't dismiss evidence as rhetoric just because you don't like the conclusions. The room went silent. Aldrich's expression turned to stone. You've forgotten your place, he said quietly, dangerously. My place is at this table, Seren replied, matching his quiet intensity. Same as yours. I have a seat, I have a voice, and I'm using both. If that threatens you, maybe you should ask yourself why data feels like a personal attack. For a long moment, Aldrich just stared at her. Then he smiled, and it was the most frightening expression Seren had ever seen. Chancellor Voss, Aldrich said, never breaking eye contact with Seren, I move that we take a recess to review this report in detail. Clearly, it requires more careful consideration than we can provide in open session. Seconded, Kara said immediately. Voss looked between them, political calculus visible on his face. Motion carries. We'll reconvene in 2 hours. Working group members, please make yourselves available for questions. The session dissolved. Seren remained standing as delegates filed out, some stopping to grab copies of her report, others avoiding looking at her entirely. Rowan approached, his expression grim. That was either brilliant or suicidal. Cutting off Aldrich like that, challenging him in front of the entire council. You just made this personal in a way it wasn't before. It was already personal, Seren said quietly. He made sure of that yesterday. What happened yesterday? He gave me until today to withdraw or watch Hollow Creek be destroyed. I chose option 3. Rowan's eyes widened. Which is? Prove him wrong so decisively that he can't afford to follow through on the threat. That's insane. Probably, Seren admitted. But I'm done being invisible. If I'm going to be destroyed anyway, I might as well make it count. Oh, the 2-hour recess turned into a battlefield. Aldrich spent it working the room, pulling delegates aside, reinforcing alliances, calling in favors. Seren watched him operate with the efficiency of someone who'd been playing political games since before she was born. But she had something he didn't expect, the smaller packs rallying behind her. Daniel from Birchwood brought 2 more minor pack representatives. Elena from Greythorn convinced a neighboring territory to join the working group. Word spread that someone was actually listening to the struggles of lesser packs. And suddenly Seren had more allies than she'd realized existed. They weren't powerful, but there were a lot of them. When the session reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted, tense, charged, like everyone knew something significant was about to break. Voss called for order. We've had time to review the preliminary findings. Discussion? Marcus Venn from Eastmarch spoke first. The data is concerning, I'll admit that. But the solution can't be surrendering pack sovereignty. There has to be a middle ground.
What middle ground? Elena asked. We either coordinate or we don't. Half measures won't solve systematic problems. Full cooperation requires trust we don't have, Kara pointed out. How do we ensure major packs aren't exploited by weaker ones claiming need? How do we ensure weaker packs aren't destroyed by stronger ones hoarding resources? Kara from Pine Ridge countered. The argument built quickly, but it was different from before. People were actually engaging with the substance, debating mechanisms rather than dismissing the premise entirely. Then Aldrich stood, and the room quieted. I've spent the last 2 hours reviewing Vale's projections in detail, he said, his voice carrying that absolute authority that made people listen. And I found something interesting. Seren's stomach dropped. The data is accurate, Aldrich continued. The trends are real. The crisis is coming, exactly as she described. He paused, letting that sink in. But the solution she proposes, this cooperative model, has a fatal flaw. It assumes all packs benefit equally from resource sharing. They don't. My coalition controls the best hunting grounds, the most reliable water sources, the richest farmland. Under Vale's model, we'd be required to share those resources with packs that have nothing comparable to offer in return. It's not cooperation. It's redistribution. It's the strong subsidizing the weak. Son. He looked directly at Seren. That might work for Hollow Creek, where you have nothing to lose. But for successful packs, it's suicide. You're not proposing we work together. You're proposing we surrender what we've built to save packs that failed to build anything themselves. The accusation hung in the air, and Seren felt several delegates who'd been warming to her proposal suddenly pull back. Aldrich had found the pressure point, the fear that cooperation meant punishment for success. That's not, Seren started. Yes, it is, Aldrich cut her off. Your own data shows it. Hollow Creek shares resources because you have no choice. Riverbend cooperates because they're struggling. Every pack supporting your proposal is either failing or barely surviving. The successful packs, the ones that actually built something worth protecting, were being asked to give it away. He addressed the room now, playing to the gallery. This isn't about saving the frontier. It's about weak packs trying to leech off strong ones. And I won't be part of it. Seren felt the momentum she'd built evaporating. He'd reframed her entire proposal in a single speech, turned cooperation into theft, made survival look like weakness. She needed to respond, needed to salvage this. But before she could speak, Rowan stood. With respect, Alpha Winters, you're describing exactly the problem Vale's proposal addresses. His tired voice carried unexpected steel. You're right that your coalition controls better resources. You built that through strength and smart management. But you're also ignoring that those resources are failing. Your hunting grounds are depleting, your water tables are dropping, your farmland is losing productivity. The data shows it. Temporary fluctuations, Aldrich began. 5-year trends aren't fluctuations, Rowan interrupted. And here's what you're missing. When your resources fail, where do you think you'll turn? You'll expand into weaker territories, take what you need by force, destroy packs that can't defend themselves. That's the trajectory we're on. Vale's proposal isn't about punishing success.
It's about preventing the strong from eventually cannibalizing the weak when the current system collapses. The room went very quiet.
Are you suggesting my coalition would engage in conquest? Aldrich's voice was soft, dangerous. I'm suggesting that when resources run out and your people are starving, you'll do what you have to do, Rowan said bluntly. Same as anyone. The question is whether we build systems that prevent that crisis, or whether we wait for the crisis and let the frontier tear itself apart.
Aldrich's expression was stone. That sounds like a threat. It's a prediction based on historical patterns. Rowan pulled out his own documents. The last time the frontier faced resource scarcity, 60 years ago, drought conditions, 7 packs were destroyed in territorial wars. 3 more dissolved voluntarily. The crisis ended not because anyone built cooperative systems, but because enough wolves died that resource pressure eased. If that's the future you're choosing, at least be honest about it. Seren watched the room process this, saw the calculation in multiple sets of eyes. The major packs were remembering history, measuring their own strength, wondering if they'd be among the survivors or the casualties. Then Chancellor Voss spoke. This has gone beyond preliminary findings. We're discussing fundamental questions about frontier governance. I'm calling a formal vote. On what? Kara demanded. On whether to establish a permanent resource management council with binding authority over participating packs. Voss looked around the room. Participation would be voluntary, but those who join agree to coordinate hunting, water use, and grain reserves according to agreed-upon guidelines. Those who don't participate continue operating independently. That's insane, Theron said. You're proposing we split the frontier into cooperative and competitive factions? I'm proposing we let packs choose their own future, Voss replied. Those who want to try Vale's model can do so. Those who prefer the current system can maintain it. We'll see which approach works better. Aldrich's eyes narrowed. You're setting up a comparison, putting the cooperative model in direct competition with independent operation. Yes, Voss said simply. Because that's the only way to know if it actually works. If cooperation succeeds, more packs will join. If it fails, it dissolves and we've lost nothing. But we stop arguing in circles and start getting actual data. Seren realized what Voss was doing. He was threading an impossible needle, creating a compromise that let both sides claim victory while actually testing her proposal in practice. It was politically brilliant. It also put everything on the line. All in favor of establishing a voluntary resource management council, Voss called. Hands went up. Rowan's, Elena's, Kara's, Daniel's. More than Seren expected, not just the small packs, but several mid-sized territories who'd been listening carefully. Opposed? Aldrich's hand went up immediately. Kara's, Theron's. Most of the major packs. Voss counted carefully. 21 in favor, 15 opposed. Motion carries. The room erupted. Delegates on both sides started talking at once, some celebrating, others protesting. Aldrich remained seated, perfectly still, but the fury radiating from him was palpable. Voss raised his hand for silence. The Resource Management Council is hereby established. Seren Vale will serve as interim coordinator until formal leadership is elected. Participating packs, submit your registration by tomorrow morning. This session is adjourned. Delegates began filing out, the noise level rising as conversations turned heated. Seren sat frozen, barely processing what had just happened. She'd won. Somehow, impossibly, she'd actually won. Rowan appeared beside her. Congratulations, you just created a new power structure on the frontier. That's either going to save everyone or get you killed. Maybe both, Seren said, her voice shaky. Probably both, Rowan agreed. Watch your back tonight. Aldrich doesn't lose gracefully. As if summoned, Aldrich appeared at the edge of her vision. He didn't approach, just stood there, 20 feet away, looking at her with an expression of such cold, calculated hatred that Seren felt it like a physical thing. Then he turned and walked out, his betas falling into step behind him. He's going to retaliate, Elena said quietly, having witnessed the exchange. He can't let this stand. Let him try, Seren said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. I'm done being afraid. But as the hall emptied and reality began to sink in, the fear came rushing back. She'd just changed everything. She'd created something new, something that threatened the entire established order, and she'd made the most powerful alpha on the frontier into a mortal enemy.
Seren gathered her papers with hands that shook despite her brave words and walked out of the hall into an uncertain future. Behind her, her nameplate remained on the table. But now it represented something different, something dangerous. Tomorrow, she'd have to figure out how to actually run a resource management council with 21 participating packs, no funding, no infrastructure, and half the frontier wanting to see her fail. Tonight, she just needed to survive until morning. The sun was setting as she walked back to her room, painting the corridor in shades of blood and shadow. Somewhere in this building, Aldrich Winters was planning her destruction. And Seren Vale, rejected Omega from a dying pack, had just bet everything, her life, her pack's survival, the entire frontier's future, on the belief that cooperation could overcome power. She reached her room, locked the door, and finally let herself collapse against the wall, shaking with reaction. She'd done it. And there was no going back. The knock came at 2 a.m, sharp, urgent, wrong. Seren jerked awake from restless half-sleep, her heart already pounding before her mind fully caught up. For a frozen moment, she considered not answering, considered that whoever was on the other side of that door might simply go away if she stayed quiet enough. The knock came again, harder. "Vale, open up." "It's Rowan." She stumbled to the door, unlocked it. Rowan pushed past her into the room, looking more disheveled than she'd ever seen him, shirt untucked, hair standing up like he'd been running his hands through it, eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. "What happened?" Seren asked, closing the door and automatically checking the corridor before she did. Empty. Dark. Silent in a way that felt threatening rather than peaceful. Aldrich made his move. Rowan's voice was tight, strained. 2 hours ago, he called an emergency meeting of his coalition, all 16 allied packs. They're drafting a formal opposition statement to the Resource Council. More than that, they're creating a counter-organization, calling it the Sovereignty Alliance. Their entire purpose is to undermine everything you're trying to build before it even starts. Seren's stomach dropped like she'd missed a step in the dark. That was fast. He's been planning it since you refused to withdraw. Probably had the framework ready, documents drafted, just waiting to see if he needed to use it. Rowan paced the small room like a caged wolf, 3 steps one way, turn, 3 steps back. He's offering preferential trade terms to any pack that joins the alliance and refuses to participate in the Resource Council, making it a binary choice. You're either with him or with you. No middle ground, no neutrality. So he's forcing packs to pick sides. Exactly. And he's got resources to make his side very attractive. The alliance is offering guaranteed trade routes, shared military defense, economic incentives, immediate support. Rowan stopped pacing, looked at her directly with an intensity that made her stand straighter despite her exhaustion. Everything a struggling pack needs. He's going to poach your coalition members, Seren. The packs that voted for the Resource Council did it because they're desperate. If Aldrich offers them a better deal with fewer strings attached, they'll take it. Survival trumps ideology every time. Seren sat down on the bed, her mind racing through scenarios, calculating probabilities, measuring losses. 21 packs had voted for the council. If even half of them defected to Aldrich's alliance, the whole thing would collapse before it started. She'd have fought for nothing, risked everything for nothing, changed nothing. What do I do? You give them a reason to stay, Rowan said flatly. Show them the Resource Council can deliver results faster and better than Aldrich's promises. Prove cooperation works before he convinces everyone it doesn't. And how long? Days. Maybe a week if we're lucky. Aldrich's planning to present the Sovereignty Alliance formally at tomorrow's session. Once it's official, once it has legitimacy and structure, packs will start choosing. You need to have something concrete to show them before that happens. Something real they can point to. Seren looked at the papers spread across her desk. Projections, models, theoretical frameworks, beautiful ideas that existed only on paper. Nothing real. Nothing she could hold up and say, this works, here's proof. Nothing she could point to as evidence that cooperation was anything more than desperate wishful thinking from failing packs. I need to go home, she said suddenly, the idea crystallizing even as she spoke it. Rowan blinked. What? To Hollow Creek. We've been running a cooperative resource system for 2 years. It's not theoretical. It's working. Real implementation, real data, real results. She was already moving, pulling out her travel pack from under the bed, her movements sharp and decisive. I need to bring back evidence, actual implementation data, something tangible that shows this isn't just an idea I came up with to feel important, proof that cooperation functions in practice, not just in speeches. How long to get there? 6 hours by fast horse if I push it, 6 back. She was already calculating when she could leave, how long she could spend gathering materials, when she had to depart to make it back in time. How long until tomorrow's session? Rowan checked his pocket watch. 10 hours from now, dawn session. Voss moved it up to accommodate the Alliance presentation. That's enough time, barely, but enough. Seren was pulling clothes from her trunk, stuffing papers into her bag. I can make it. That's insane, Rowan said, but his tone suggested he was evaluating the plan rather than dismissing it. You'll be exhausted. You won't have time to prepare a proper presentation. You'll look like you rode through the frontier backwards. I don't need to prepare a speech. I need to show them proof. Seren was moving with focused intensity now, the exhaustion from earlier burned away by purpose. Aldrich is offering promises, beautiful promises backed by his coalition's resources. I can't compete with that, but I can offer evidence. Real data showing cooperation works. That's the only advantage I have. I've actually done this. Rowan watched her for a moment, his tired eyes sharp with calculation. Then he nodded slowly, decisively. I'll cover for you at the summit. If anyone asks where you are, you're conducting urgent pack business. That's technically true. I'll also work the room, try to shore up support among the wavering delegates. But Seren, he caught her arm, made her look at him. If you don't make it back in time, if you're even 5 minutes late, this whole thing falls apart. Aldrich will use your absence as proof you're not serious, that the council is already failing. You understand that? I understand. Don't thank me yet. If you don't make it back in time, this whole thing falls apart, and I'll have wasted political capital defending an empty chair. He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the handle. For what it's worth, this is either brilliant or the worst decision you've ever made. Story of my life, Seren said, pulling on her riding boots, sturdy leather, built for long distances. The same boots she'd worn through 2 winters of keeping Hollow Creek alive. Rowan left without another word. Seren finished packing in silence, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to travel light and fast. Extra clothes, water, the preliminary reports from yesterday in case she needed to reference them. She strapped on her knife. Frontier travel was never entirely safe, especially alone, and checked her supplies one more time. 20 minutes later, she was in the stables, saddling a horse she'd borrowed from the summit's common stock. The stable hand watched her with obvious confusion. It was the middle of the night. She was clearly preparing for a long ride, but he was paid not to ask questions of summit delegates. I'll have her back by midday, Seren said, checking the saddle straps. Yes, ma'am, the stable hand said, his tone making it clear he didn't believe her but wasn't going to argue. Seren swung into the saddle, settled her weight, adjusted the reins. The horse shifted beneath her, sensing the urgency in her movements. Let's go, she murmured, and touched her heels to the horse's flanks. They rode out of the summit complex into the pre-dawn darkness, hooves striking sparks against stone courtyard, then muffled thuds as they hit the dirt road leading into the frontier. The sky was black overhead, stars brilliant and cold. The air smelled like pine and coming rain. The frontier stretched before her, familiar territory, harsh and unforgiving. The landscape that had shaped every hard choice she'd ever made. Hills and valleys she knew by heart. Rivers she'd crossed 100 times. The wild spaces between settlements where wolves ran and danger waited. 6 hours. She could do 6 hours. She'd done worse on less sleep with more at stake. Actually, she'd never had more at stake, but the principle held. She pushed the horse into a steady canter, eating up distance, racing against a deadline that might determine the frontier's entire future. Behind her, the summit complex disappeared into darkness, its lights winking out one by one as she put miles between herself and everything she'd built in the past 3 days. Ahead, Hollow Creek waited with the answers she needed. If she could get there and back before everything fell apart, the sky was just beginning to lighten, that particular quality of pre-dawn gray where the world exists in shades of shadow, when Hollow Creek's boundaries came into view. Seren's horse was lathered and breathing hard, white foam at its neck where the reins rubbed. She'd pushed the pace harder than she should have, harder than was probably safe for the animal, but there hadn't been a choice. Every minute mattered.
She dismounted at this pack house, her legs trembling from 6 hours in the saddle, muscles screaming protest, and half ran toward the main building. Lights were on, early risers preparing for the day's work, the routine of pack life continuing regardless of summit politics. Marcus Thorne met her at the door, his expression caught somewhere between surprise and anger, his face doing complicated things as he processed her unexpected appearance. "Vale, what the hell are you doing here? You're supposed to be at the summit representing us, not—" "I need the cooperative management records," Seren interrupted, pushing past him without apology. "All of them. Water sharing agreements, coordinated hunting schedules, crop exchange documentation, trade data, population statistics. Everything from the past 2 years that shows the system working." Marcus grabbed her arm, spinning her around with more force than necessary. "You want to explain what's happening? Because last I heard you were making speeches, not abandoning your post. I created a resource management council. 21 packs voted to participate. Chancellor Voss approved it." Seren pulled free, heading for the record room where she'd spent countless hours documenting their survival. "But there's opposition. Aldrich Winters is creating a counter-organization to destroy it before it starts. I need to prove the cooperative model works or it collapses. And Hollow Creek is the proof. We're the evidence that cooperation actually functions." "You created a what?" Marcus followed her, his voice rising with each word. "You were supposed to sit there quietly, smile at the right people, maybe make some connections that could help us later. Not reorganize frontier governance. Not put a target on our backs by challenging the most powerful alpha in the territories. Too late." Seren was pulling files from cabinets, stacking documents with practiced efficiency. She knew exactly where everything was. She'd organized this system herself when Marcus hadn't cared enough to do it properly. "It's done. The council exists. Now help me or get out of my way because I have 4 hours to get back to the summit with evidence or everything falls apart." For a long moment, Marcus just stared at her, and Seren realized with a strange detachment that she'd never spoken to him like that before. Never challenged his authority directly. Never demanded instead of asked. Never treated him like an obstacle instead of a leader. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite respect, but a recognition that she was no longer the Omega who'd left here 3 days ago. That something fundamental had changed. "The council actually passed?" he asked, his tone different now, more calculating than angry. 21 votes in favor. Enough to make it official. But Aldrich Winters is creating something called the Sovereignty Alliance to compete with it, offering immediate benefits, trade guarantees, everything struggling packs need. I have hours to show the other packs that cooperation delivers results, or they'll defect to his organization. She found the water management logs, the detailed records she'd kept meticulously for 2 years because someone had to, and no one else would. These show how we've stabilized our water situation through sharing agreements with Riverbend, Pine Ridge, and East March. This is proof it works. Real numbers, real outcomes, not theory. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his face doing that thing where he was thinking politically instead of emotionally. Then, surprisingly, he moved to a different cabinet and pulled out additional files she hadn't even known he'd been keeping. "You'll want the economic data too. Trade volumes before and after we started cooperating with our neighbors. Shows cost reductions, efficiency gains, proof that sharing resources is cheaper than competing for them." He handed her the documents, thick folders full of numbers. "And the population stability records. We stopped losing people once we implemented shared resources. That's concrete evidence cooperation works." Seren took the files, genuinely shocked. Marcus had never shown interest in her documentation before, had dismissed it as busy work when she'd tried to show him the patterns. "You've been tracking this? I'm not an idiot, Vale. I knew what you were building, even if I didn't think anyone would ever care." Marcus pulled out more documentation. Hunting coordination records, crop yield comparisons, even diplomatic correspondence with neighboring packs. "I've been keeping parallel records because I hoped someday it might matter. Hoped someone might actually look at what we've accomplished here and see value instead of failure. Looks like someday is today." "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because hoping doesn't mean believing." Marcus set the last stack of files on the table between them. "I hoped cooperation mattered, but I didn't believe anyone would listen to a dying pack's desperate measures. You just proved me wrong. Don't make me regret it." They worked together for the next hour, compiling evidence, organizing it into something coherent and presentable. Marcus knew where specific data points were, which records would be most convincing, how to frame the information for maximum political impact. He'd been planning this presentation for years, Seren realized, planning for an opportunity he'd never thought would come. Other pack members arrived as dawn broke fully, light streaming through windows, word spreading that Seren was back, that something significant was happening, that the quiet Omega who'd left for the summit 3 days ago had somehow changed the frontier's political landscape. Thomas, Elena's second from Greythorn, appeared in the doorway breathing hard like he'd been running. "We heard you got the council established. Is that true?" "It's true," Seren confirmed, not looking up from the documents she was sorting into categories: water, hunting, agriculture, economics, population. "Greythorn wants in," Thomas said. "Elena sent me to tell you we're committed. Whatever you need, data, resources, political support, you have it. She said to tell you that some of us have been waiting our entire lives for someone to actually challenge the system. Don't let us down." More voices joined from the doorway, pack members gathering, news spreading. Kara from Pine Ridge had sent a messenger pledging full support. Daniel from Birchwood was already riding toward the summit with his own documentation of cooperative resource management. The smaller packs were rallying, spreading the word through informal channels Seren hadn't even known existed, a network of struggling territories that had been invisible to the summit's power brokers. By the time she finished compiling everything, she had a stack of evidence 2 inches thick, real data showing cooperation in practice, not just theory. Proof that struggling packs could stabilize through coordination. Evidence that the model worked when implemented properly. Numbers that couldn't be dismissed as wishful thinking or desperate fantasy. Marcus walked her back to her horse, now rested and ready for the return journey. The sun was higher now, morning proper, the frontier waking around them. "You know Aldrich's going to come after us for this. After Hollow Creek specifically. We're providing the evidence that undermines his entire argument. He can't let that stand." "I know. And you're doing it anyway." "I'm doing it because it's right," Seren said, securing the documents in her saddlebag with careful precision. "And because I'm tired of being invisible while the frontier falls apart around us. Tired of pretending we don't matter. Tired of accepting that power is the only thing that counts." Marcus studied her for a long moment, his expression complicated. "You've changed." "No," Seren said, swinging into the saddle, feeling her abused muscles protest the movement. "I've stopped pretending to be what everyone else wanted me to be. I've stopped making myself smaller so other people feel bigger. This is who I've always been. You just never bothered to look." She rode out of Hollow Creek as the sun climbed higher, racing back toward the summit with evidence that might save everything or damn them all. The horse sensed her urgency, responding to her cues, settling into the ground-eating pace that would get them back in time. If nothing went wrong, if the weather held, if the horse didn't go lame, if she could stay conscious despite exhaustion clawing at her. Too many ifs. But she'd built a life on long odds and desperate gambles. One more couldn't hurt. The return ride was harder. Her body was exhausted from 12 hours of travel in 24. The horse was tired despite the rest, and every mile felt longer than the last. Her legs ached from gripping the saddle. Her back screamed from maintaining position. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep and wind and strain. But Seren pushed through, counting minutes, calculating whether she'd make it in time, running through what she'd say when she arrived, how she'd present the evidence, what arguments Aldrich would make, and how she'd counter them. She reached the summit complex with 30 minutes to spare before the session started. Barely enough time to clean up, change clothes, organize her thoughts into something coherent. She didn't have time for any of that. She went straight to the hall, still wearing her riding clothes, dust-covered and sweat-stained, smelling like horse and leather and the frontier itself, carrying her documents like weapons she'd ridden through the night to retrieve. The hall was already filling, delegates arriving early for what everyone seemed to sense would be a significant session. They looked at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt to something that might have been respect. She'd left yesterday as someone who'd won a surprising victory. She was returning as someone who looked like she'd been dragged through the frontier backwards, and was still somehow standing. Rowan appeared at her side immediately, his face showing relief. "You made it. I wasn't sure you would." "Did I miss anything critical?" Aldrich's been working the room all morning. The Sovereignty Alliance is official as of an hour ago. Formal charter, organizational structure, membership benefits package. He's got 12 packs committed already, another 6 seriously considering. Rowan's expression was grim. He's offering immediate benefits, Seren. Tangible support that packs can access today. You're offering an experiment that might work eventually. Some of your council members are wavering. 3 have already asked me if there's a way to participate in both organizations. What did you tell them? That Aldrich made it a binary choice. You're either with the Alliance or the Council. No middle ground. Rowan glanced toward where Aldrich stood surrounded by supporters, looking confident and powerful and completely in control. He's forcing Pax to choose, and he's making his side look very attractive. Then I'll make our side look better, Seren said, moving toward her seat with determination that overrode exhaustion. The session began exactly on time. Chancellor Voss looked tired, like he'd spent the night mediating conflicts and managing egos, but his voice was firm. We have significant business to address today. First, Alpha Winters has requested time to present a formal proposal regarding frontier governance. The floor is yours, Alpha. Aldrich stood, and the room's attention shifted to him immediately, like iron to a magnet. He looked perfectly composed, every inch the powerful Alpha. Tailored clothes, confident posture, the aura of someone who'd never doubted his right to lead. Everything Seren wasn't. Thank you, Chancellor. Yesterday, this council voted to establish a resource management council based on cooperative principles. I respect the democratic process, even when I disagree with the outcome. His tone was reasonable, diplomatic, the voice of someone being magnanimous in defeat. However, I believe there's a fundamental flaw in the approach that needs to be addressed. Mandatory cooperation, even when called voluntary, creates dependency and punishes success. It rewards failure and penalizes the packs that have built something worth protecting. So I'm proposing an alternative that maintains our frontier values. He distributed professionally prepared documents, bound, indexed, printed on quality paper. Seren's hastily compiled evidence suddenly looked pathetic by comparison, rough and disorganized and clearly assembled in desperate haste. The Frontier Sovereignty Alliance, Aldrich continued, his presentation smooth and practiced, is a coalition of packs committed to maintaining independence while providing mutual support. Members receive guaranteed trade access through the Alliance's network, shared defense agreements. If any member is threatened, all members respond. Economic development assistance for infrastructure projects, and preferential terms on resource exchanges. He paused, letting that sink in. But they retain full autonomy over their own resources and territory. No surrender of sovereignty, no forced sharing, no bureaucratic oversight of internal pack decisions. Just packs helping packs who choose to help themselves. It was a masterful presentation. Everything Seren had proposed, carefully reframed to avoid the word cooperation, while offering all the same benefits plus the thing every alpha valued most, independence. Several delegates were nodding, clearly attracted to the pitch, seeing it as the best of both worlds. 12 packs have already committed to the Alliance, Aldrich said, confidence radiating from every word. We're offering membership to any pack that values sovereignty and mutual respect. Those who prefer the Resource Council's approach are welcome to try that experiment. But for packs that want results without surrendering control, the Sovereignty Alliance is ready to deliver today. Not eventually. Not after we build systems and negotiate frameworks. Today. He sat down to scattered applause, not overwhelming, but real. Genuine enthusiasm from delegates who saw his proposal as the solution they'd been hoping for. Voss looked at Seren, his expression unreadable. Do you wish to respond? Every eye in the room turned toward her. The exhausted Omega in riding clothes who smelled like she'd spent 12 hours on horseback. The representative from a dying pack who'd somehow challenged the Frontier's entire power structure. The woman who'd been rejected and dismissed and told to know her place. She stood slowly, feeling every ache in her body, acutely aware of how she must look compared to Aldrich's polish and presentation. Alpha Winters is offering you a very attractive deal, she began, her voice steady despite her fatigue. Security, support, independence, it sounds perfect. And if the Frontier wasn't dying, it might even work. She pulled out her documents, the evidence she'd ridden 12 hours to retrieve, compiled in the middle of the night by a pack that understood desperation. But here's what he's not telling you. The Sovereignty Alliance maintains the current system. Independent management, competitive resource use, every pack for themselves with some trade benefits thrown in. which means it also maintains the trajectory we're currently on. The resource depletion I documented 2 days ago, the water table drops, the game population decline, the failing crop yields, the Alliance doesn't fix any of that. It just offers you better terms while the foundation crumbles beneath us. Seren distributed her evidence, not polished, not professionally formatted, but real. Raw data from packs that had survived when they shouldn't have. This is 2 years of data from Hollow Creek, cooperative resource management implemented out of desperation. Before cooperation, our water tables were dropping 8% annually. We were facing complete well failure within 3 years. After cooperation, after we started coordinating with Riverbend, Pine Ridge, and East March, the decline stopped. Our water tables have stabilized, not theory, measured results over 24 months. She pointed to specific pages, forcing delegates to look at actual numbers instead of rhetoric. Coordinated hunting with 2 adjacent territories. Before coordination, game populations in our shared range were declining 6% annually. After coordination, they're recovering at 4% per year. Not speculation about what might work. Evidence of what does work when packs stop competing and start cooperating. Shared grain reserves with 4 neighboring packs, she continued, pulling out more documentation. Reduced waste by 30%, stabilized prices by 18%, eliminated food shortages that used to happen every 3rd year. This isn't abstract policy discussion. This is the difference between people eating and people starving. Hollow Creek was desperate, Carowin pointed out from across the table, her voice sharp. You had no choice but to cooperate. That's not a model. That's survival. That's exactly right, Seren admitted, and the agreement seemed to surprise Kara. We implemented cooperation because the alternative was dissolution. We shared resources because hoarding them meant everyone died. We coordinated with our neighbors because pride doesn't keep your pack fed. But the results are real regardless of motivation. We're not thriving. We'll never be a powerful pack like the Winter Coalition or Stone Ridge. But we're stable. Our population stopped declining for the first time in a decade. Our resources stopped depleting. We went from dying to surviving because we chose coordination over competition. She pulled out more documents, spreading them across the table so everyone could see. Greythorn Pack has similar data on water management, Pine Ridge on hunting coordination, Birchwood on agricultural sharing, Riverbend on trade efficiency. Multiple packs, different circumstances, different resources, same result. Cooperation stabilizes resource management better than independent operation. That's not ideology, that's evidence. That's a handful of small packs, Theron Black said dismissively, waving a hand like he was swatting away an annoying insect. Desperate territories doing desperate things, hardly proof it scales to legitimate governance. It's more proof than the Sovereignty Alliance has offered, Seren shot back, her exhaustion making her sharper than she might have been otherwise. Aldrich's proposal is beautiful in theory, gorgeous rhetoric about sovereignty and mutual respect, but it doesn't address the actual problem, that we're depleting shared resources faster than they can recover. That competition for limited resources drives waste and inefficiency. That the current system is failing measurably, documentably, regardless of how much political power you have. She moved around the table, making eye contact with delegates who'd voted for the council, reminding them why they'd taken that risk. The Alliance offers you support while the system fails. Promises that your pack will be fine because you'll have trade access and defense agreements. But what happens when the resources run out? When the game is gone and the water is depleted and the crops won't grow? The Alliance doesn't prevent that. It just ensures you'll be competing with your allies for what's left. The Resource Council offers you a different system that prevents the failure from happening in the first place. The Resource Council is untested at scale, Aldrich interjected smoothly. You're asking packs to gamble their survival on an experiment that might work in theory, but has never been proven beyond a handful of desperate territories. The current system is already failing, Seren countered. That's not an experiment. That's measured fact documented in your own territory reports. Staying with a failing system because it's familiar isn't conservative, it's suicidal. Doing the same thing and expecting different results is the definition of madness. She held up the Hollow Creek data like a shield. Yes, the Resource Council is new at this scale, but the principles are proven. Small-scale cooperation works. It saves lives. It stabilizes communities. The question is whether we're brave enough to try it at larger scale or whether we're going to keep doing what we've always done and watch the frontier collapse around us. The room was silent. delegates processing, calculating their interests, measuring risks. Here's what I'm proposing, Seren said, and she could feel this was the moment everything balanced on. The Resource Council and the Sovereignty Alliance both exist. Let PACs choose freely based on their own judgment. But let's agree to measure results objectively. 1 year from now, we compare data from both organizations: water tables, game populations, resource stability, economic indicators, population trends. Whichever approach shows better results in practice, that becomes the frontier standard. Let the evidence decide, not politics, not power, not who has the best rhetoric. Let actual outcomes determine which model serves the frontier better. It was a gamble. If cooperation failed, she'd lose everything: credibility, support, possibly Hollow Creek's existence. But if it worked, Aldrich's expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation. You want to make this a competition. I want to make this about results instead of ideology, Seren replied, meeting his gaze directly. You're confident the Alliance approach is superior. You have resources, experience, political connections. I'm confident cooperation works better when properly implemented. Let's test both models fairly and see who's right. A year from now, the data will tell us which approach actually serves the frontier's interests. Voss leaned forward, interest clear on his face. That's actually reasonable. A 1-year trial period with measured outcomes from both organizations. Both approaches get fair testing under real conditions. I don't need a trial period to know sovereignty works, Aldrich said, but there was something defensive in his tone now. Centuries of frontier history prove that strong, independent PACs thrive. Then you should have no problem proving it with current data, Seren said quietly, unless you're afraid the evidence won't support your position. The challenge hung in the air, impossible to ignore. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. Calling an alpha's courage into question was dangerous, but Aldrich couldn't refuse without looking like he was avoiding accountability. For a long moment, Aldrich just looked at her, his expression cold and calculating. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. Not warmly. It was the smile of a predator that knows it has the advantage and is willing to let prey think otherwise for now. Fine. 1 year. We'll run both models in parallel and compare results. Let the frontier see which approach delivers better outcomes for its members. He looked around the room, making eye contact with key delegates. But when cooperation fails, when the Resource Council collapses under its own bureaucratic weight and proves that good intentions don't replace good governance, I expect its supporters to acknowledge the failure publicly and join the alliance without further argument. When cooperation succeeds, Seren replied, refusing to accept his framing, I expect the Sovereignty Alliance to acknowledge that sovereignty isn't the only value that matters, that sometimes working together serves the frontier better than competing. Voss looked around the table, reading the room with practiced skill. Any objections to a 1-year trial period with both models operating in parallel, followed by objective assessment of results? Silence. No one wanted to be the one to refuse a data-driven comparison. It would look like they didn't trust their own model to perform. Then it's settled, Voss declared, bringing his hand down on the table with finality. Both the Resource Management Council and the Frontier Sovereignty Alliance are officially recognized by this summit. PACs may join either organization, both, or neither according to their own judgment. In 1 year's time, we reconvene at the next summit and assess measured results from both approaches. May the best model win. The session dissolved into immediate chaos, delegates clustering in tight groups, voices rising as arguments broke out, PACs choosing sides or trying to negotiate positions. Some committed to the alliance immediately, attracted by Aldrich's immediate benefits and proven leadership. Others pledged to the council, convinced by Seren's evidence or simply willing to try something different. A few remained carefully neutral, waiting to see which way the wind would blow before committing. Seren remained standing at her place, exhausted and shaking and somehow still upright. Her legs felt like they might give out. Her vision was getting slightly blurry around the edges. She'd been awake for nearly 30 hours, ridden 12 hours in total, and just bet everything on a 1-year timeline. She'd done it. Not victory, not yet, not even close. But she'd bought time, created space for cooperation to prove itself. Given the frontier a chance to choose something different, now she just had to make it work. No pressure. Rowan appeared beside her, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. That was either the boldest bluff I've ever seen or the most honest proposal in summit history. It wasn't a bluff, Seren said, her voice coming from somewhere far away. The data is real. Cooperation works. It has to work. The data is from desperate packs with nothing to lose. You just bet everything that it scales to larger territories with more complex politics and competing interests. He wasn't criticizing, just stating facts with brutal honesty. You know that, right? You know what you've committed to? I know. Seren gathered her documents with hands that trembled from exhaustion and reaction. But it's the truth. Cooperation works. The evidence proves it. And if we can't convince packs to choose survival over pride when the data is this clear, then maybe we deserve what's coming. For what it's worth, Rowan said quietly, his tired eyes showing something like admiration, I think you're right. And I think you just changed everything, whether you succeed or fail. The frontier will never be the same after today. Elena approached quickly, her expression fierce with determination and something else. Hope, maybe, or defiance. Greythorn is all in. Whatever the Resource Council needs, you have our full support. Data, resources, political backing. We're committed. Daniel from Birchwood was right behind her, young and nervous but resolute. Birchwood too. We've already been doing this for a year. Might as well make it official and help prove it works at scale. More voices joined, a tide building. Kara from Pine Ridge pledging cooperation and promising hunting data. Thomas from Riverbend committing support. Small packs that had been invisible yesterday suddenly finding their voice, stepping into the light, committing to something larger than themselves. By the end of the day, after hours of negotiation and debate and packs choosing sides, the Resource Council had 17 packs formally committed. Not the full 21 that had voted for it initially. 4 had defected to the alliance, swayed by Aldrich's immediate benefits and proven track record. But 17 was enough. 17 was a foundation to build on. 17 packs betting their futures on cooperation. The Sovereignty Alliance had 14 packs, larger territories on average, more resources, more political clout, more established power. They had the advantage in almost every measurable category, except one. They were still operating on the same principles that were failing, and Seren had evidence those principles didn't work long term. 1 year to prove it, 1 year to save the frontier or watch it burn. No pressure at all. That evening, as delegates dispersed to their various territories to begin implementation, Seren sat in her small room and finally let herself feel the full weight of what she'd done. 17 packs were depending on her to make cooperation work. Hundreds of wolves whose survival now rested on whether she could translate evidence from desperate small pack experiments into functional large-scale governance. Aldrich Winters was waiting for her to fail so he could destroy everything she'd built and prove that power was the only thing that mattered. The frontier's future hung in the balance between two competing visions, sovereignty and cooperation, competition and coordination, the old way and something new. And she, an Omega from a dying pack who'd been rejected and dismissed and told to know her place, was somehow at the center of it all. There was a knock at her door. Seren opened it to find Miriam Chen, the session coordinator, holding a package wrapped in rough cloth. "This came for you," Miriam said, her expression showing something that might have been respect. "Courier from Hollow Creek, arrived an hour ago." Seren took the package, felt its weight. "Thank you. What you did today..." Miriam paused, choosing words carefully. "I've been coordinating summit sessions for 12 years. I've never seen someone challenge the entire power structure and survive, let alone win concessions. Whatever happens next, you've already accomplished something remarkable. Or something catastrophically stupid." Miriam smiled slightly. "Sometimes those are the same thing. Good luck, Vale. The frontier needs people willing to take catastrophic risks." After she left, Seren opened the package. Inside was a letter from Marcus Thorne and a small wooden carving, the Hollow Creek pack symbol, carefully crafted from river birch, smoothed and oiled until it gleamed. The letter was brief, Marcus's handwriting sharp and precise. Vale. The Pack Council met this afternoon. Unanimous vote. You're our official representative to the Resource Management Council. Not because we think you'll definitely succeed, not because we're confident you won't get us all killed, because you're the only one brave enough or crazy enough to try. Don't prove us wrong. And if you do prove us wrong, make it spectacular. Thorne. It wasn't warmth, it wasn't approval or affection or any of the things she'd spent years hoping for from her alpha, but it was recognition, acknowledgement that she'd done something that mattered, that she mattered. Seren set the carving on her desk, next to the stack of evidence that had bought her 1 year to change the frontier. The wood caught the lamplight, glowing warm. Outside her window, the sun was setting over the summit complex, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow, delegates would return home and begin the real work, implementing cooperation in territories that had never trusted each other, building systems that had never existed, proving that coordination could overcome competition. Tomorrow, Aldrich Winters would begin working systematically to undermine everything she'd built, to prove cooperation was failure waiting to happen. Tomorrow, the frontier would start choosing its future. But tonight, just for a moment, Seren allowed herself to feel what she'd accomplished. She'd been rejected, dismissed, threatened, and told she was nothing. And she'd still won. Not the war, not yet, not even close. But the battle, the right to try. The chance to prove that even rejected Omegas from dying packs could reshape the world if they were brave enough to stand up and speak truth to power. She picked up the Hollow Creek carving, turning it over in her hands. It was crude in places, roughly made, imperfect. Just like her. Just like the Resource Council. Just like every struggling pack that had chosen cooperation over pride. Imperfect. Flawed. Built from desperation rather than strength. But real. And real was enough to build on. Seren placed the carving back on the desk and began drafting implementation plans for 17 packs who'd just bet their survival on her being right. 1 year to prove cooperation worked. 1 year to save the frontier from itself. 1 year to show Aldrich Winters and every other alpha who'd dismissed her that power wasn't the only currency that mattered. She had evidence. She had allies. She had nothing left to lose. It would have to be enough. Because there was no going back now. The frontier's future had just changed direction. And Seren Vale, the rejected Omega from Hollow Creek, had been the one to change it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Aldrich's opposition. Implementation struggles, political maneuvering, the hard work of turning theory into practice. But tonight, she'd earned this moment. The moment when the powerless became powerful. When the dismissed became undeniable. When the rejected became essential. Seren looked out at the darkening frontier and smiled. Let them try to stop her now. The frontier didn't change overnight. Seren learned that truth the hard way over the next 11 months. Implementation was brutal. The 17 packs and the Resource Council had voted for cooperation in theory. Making it work in practice turned out to be an entirely different challenge. Territorial disputes that had simmered for generations suddenly mattered because shared hunting grounds required agreed boundaries. Water rights that had been informal arrangements became formal conflicts when coordination meant accountability. Packs that had never trusted each other now had to share data, resources, and decision-making. And Seren was in the middle of all of it. She spent the first 3 months traveling between territories, mediating disputes, building the actual infrastructure of cooperation that her proposal had promised, setting up monitoring systems for water tables, establishing rotating hunting schedules that prevented overuse, creating shared grain reserves that required packs to contribute during abundance and draw during scarcity. It was exhausting, frustrating work that nobody saw and fewer people appreciated. The Sovereignty Alliance, meanwhile, was thriving. Aldrich had delivered exactly what he'd promised: immediate trade benefits, defense agreements, economic support. His 14-member packs were visibly prospering, at least in the short term. They held joint military exercises that projected strength. They coordinated trade caravans that reduced costs. They looked organized, powerful, successful. The Resource Council looked like 17 struggling packs barely holding together. 6 months in, Seren sat in yet another mediation session, this time between Pine Ridge and Graythorn over hunting boundaries, and wondered if she'd made a catastrophic mistake. The two packs had been arguing for 3 hours about whether elk migration routes constituted shared resources or territorial sovereignty. The elk cross both territories, Elena from Graythorn was saying, her voice tight with frustration. If Pine Ridge overhunts during migration, our winter stores suffer. That's exactly the kind of problem the Council is supposed to solve. And if Graythorn dictates our hunting practices, we lose autonomy, Kara from Pine Ridge countered. That's exactly what we voted against when we rejected the alliance. Seren rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building behind her eyes. You both agreed to coordinated hunting. That's literally in the charter you signed. Coordination isn't the same as control, Kara said.
And coordination doesn't work if one pack ignores the agreements, Elena shot back. They kept arguing. Seren kept mediating. The sun kept setting on another day without resolution. That night, alone in the small office she'd established in a neutral territory halfway between council members, Seren reviewed the data. Water monitoring was working. They had solid evidence that coordinated management was stabilizing water tables across multiple territories. Grain reserves were functioning, though barely. Several packs had contributed less than promised. Hunting coordination was the disaster currently playing out in real time. One success, one partial success, one failure. Not exactly the triumphant proof she'd promised. She was drafting yet another mediation proposal when someone knocked. Rowan entered without waiting for permission, carrying a bottle and 2 cups. "You look like you need this," he said, pouring something that smelled strong enough to strip paint. Seren accepted the cup. "That bad?" "I've seen corpses with better color." Rowan sat down heavily. "How's the hunting dispute?" "Still disputing. Elena wants enforceable quotas. Kara wants voluntary guidelines. Nobody wants to compromise because compromise looks like losing. So basically, politics as usual. Basically." Seren drank, felt the burn, welcomed it. "The alliance is winning, Rowan. Aldrich's packs are prosperous. Mine are fighting over elk. In 5 months, we have to present results to the summit. And I don't know what I'm going to show them besides good intentions and marginal improvements." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "The water data is solid. One success out of 3 major initiatives isn't exactly a ringing endorsement. It's one more success than most people expected you to achieve." Rowan refilled both cups. "You're fighting against centuries of territorial thinking. The fact that 17 packs are still trying to cooperate after 6 months of hard implementation is remarkable. The fact that you haven't had anyone quit yet is borderline miraculous." "Give them time," Seren said bitterly. "Stop it!" Rowan's voice was sharp enough to make her look up. "You're exhausted and discouraged, which is understandable. But you're also losing perspective. 6 months ago, cooperation between frontier packs was theoretical. Now you have functioning water management across 8 territories, operational grain reserves serving 12 packs, and yes, a difficult hunting coordination effort that's teaching everyone involved how to negotiate instead of fight. That's real change, Seren. It counts. It counts if it survives the next 5 months. Then make sure it survives." Rowan stood, headed for the door. "You didn't come this far to give up because implementation is hard. You knew it would be hard. Do the work." He left her alone with the data and the impossible task of turning 17 independent packs into a functioning cooperative. Seren looked at the numbers until they blurred. Then she started drafting new proposals because Rowan was right about one thing. She hadn't come this far to quit. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. 7 months into implementation, a severe early winter hit the frontier. Snow arrived 6 weeks ahead of schedule, temperatures dropped below freezing for 10 days straight, and several territories found themselves dangerously short on stored food. The Sovereignty Alliance packs weathered it well. They had the resources to handle short-term crises, and Aldrich's trade network meant they could buy supplies from unaffected territories. But 2 of the smaller alliance members, packs that had joined for the benefits but didn't have significant resources of their own, started struggling. Their trade guarantees didn't help when there was nothing to trade for. Their defense agreements didn't feed hungry wolves. Meanwhile, the Resource Council's grain reserve system kicked in. It wasn't smooth, it wasn't elegant. 3 packs had to be convinced to release reserves they'd contributed, and 2 others argued about distribution formulas. But within 48 hours of the crisis becoming apparent, the council was moving grain from territories with surplus to territories in need. Birchwood, which had suffered the worst shortages, received enough grain to feed their pack for 3 weeks, contributed by 5 different territories, coordinated through the system Seren had built. Daniel sent her a message. "We would have lost people without this. Tell Elena and the others they saved lives." It was the first time the system had been tested by real crisis instead of theoretical projections. And it had worked. Seren sent the data to all council members that night. No commentary, no triumphant declarations, just the numbers showing what cooperation had accomplished. The next morning, Kara from Pine Ridge sent a message about the hunting dispute. "We can compromise on quotas. Elena's right. Coordination only works if we all commit to it."
That afternoon, two packs that had been lukewarm supporters became active participants in water monitoring. That evening, word reached Seren that one of the Sovereignty Alliance's smaller members was quietly inquiring about Resource Council membership. The crisis had done what months of arguments couldn't. It had made cooperation real. Not theoretical, not ideological, but concretely, undeniably real. Packs had needed help, and other packs had provided it, not out of charity or political calculation, but because the system they'd built together required it, because they'd chosen to be responsible for each other. The final 5 months moved faster. The hunting coordination dispute resolved itself once packs accepted that autonomy without coordination meant eventual depletion. The grain reserves expanded as more territories saw the benefit of crisis insurance. Water monitoring became routine, generating data that helped territories identify problems before they became disasters. The Resource Council started to look less like a desperate experiment and more like a functioning organization. But Aldrich wasn't idle. 10 months in, the Sovereignty Alliance announced a major expansion, 4 new pack members, including 2 mid-sized territories with significant resources. Aldrich held a formal ceremony, projecting strength and unity, showing the frontier that traditional power structures still worked. 3 weeks before the summit, he sent Seren a message. Just one line. Looking forward to comparing results. Hope you're prepared to admit failure gracefully. Seren read it 3 times, felt the familiar anger building, then channeled it into final preparations. She spent the last weeks before the summit compiling data. Not spinning it, not selecting favorable numbers, just gathering every piece of evidence about what the Resource Council had actually accomplished. The successes and the failures, the smooth implementations and the messy compromises, the quantifiable results, and the harder-to-measure changes in how packs thought about their relationships with each other. When she arrived at the summit for the 1-year assessment, she carried documentation that filled 2 large cases. The hall looked the same as it had a year ago, but Seren felt completely different walking into it, no longer invisible, no longer dismissed. Several delegates nodded to her as she entered, respect or at least acknowledgement. Her nameplate was no longer hastily carved, but properly rendered, permanent-looking. She'd earned her place at this table. Now she had to prove she deserved to keep it. The assessment session was scheduled for the 2nd day. Voss wanted both organizations to present results to the full council. Aldrich would go first, then Seren. That night before presentations, there was a formal dinner. Mandatory attendance, political theater, the usual summit dynamics. Seren dressed carefully, not in the riding clothes she'd worn a year ago, but not trying to match the formal elegance of the major pack representatives either. Practical, professional, herself. She was heading to the dining hall when Aldrich appeared in the corridor, blocking her path. They hadn't spoken directly since the trial period began. All communication had been through official channels, formal and distant. Now they stood 3 feet apart in an empty hallway, and the tension was thick enough to choke on. "You've done better than I expected," Aldrich said finally. His tone was neutral, almost conversational, but his eyes were cold. The grain reserve response to the early winter was competent. Your water monitoring data is solid. You've kept 17 contentious packs working together for a year without the whole thing collapsing. That takes skill. "Thank you," Seren said carefully, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "But it's not enough." Aldrich's expression hardened. "You've proven cooperation can work on a small scale with motivated participants. You haven't proven it's superior to traditional governance. The alliance has grown while your membership stayed static. We've increased prosperity across our territories while you've managed marginal improvements in resource stability. Tomorrow, when we compare results in front of the full council, the frontier will see that sovereignty and strength still matter more than idealistic sharing. We'll see what the data shows," Seren said evenly. "The data will show that I was right." Aldrich stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You challenged me a year ago, Vale. Made me look small in front of the entire summit. I've spent 12 months proving you wrong while being civil about it. But when this is over, when the council acknowledges that the alliance model works better, I want you to remember something." "What's that?" "You were never going to win. Not against me, not against the system, not against reality." His voice was soft, almost gentle, which made the words cut deeper. "You're intelligent, I'll give you that. Resourceful, determined. But you're still an Omega from a dying pack trying to compete with Alphas who've been playing this game since before you were born. Tomorrow, everyone will see that, and then your moment of relevance ends. He walked past her toward the dining hall, leaving her standing alone in the corridor. Seren stood there for a full minute, processing. Then she smiled. Because Aldrich had just revealed something important. He was worried. Confident Alphas didn't corner their opponents in hallways to remind them of their place. Secure leaders didn't need to predict victory before the results were presented. He was worried that she might actually prove him wrong. Good. She should be worried too, but somehow Aldrich's certainty gave her something to push against, something to prove wrong. Seren walked into the dining hall with her head high and spent the evening making quiet conversation with council members, discussing implementation challenges, listening to concerns and successes, building relationships instead of projecting power. It was a different kind of politics than Aldrich played. Tomorrow they'd find out which kind mattered more. The assessment session started precisely at 9. The hall was packed. Every delegate, plus observers from non-aligned packs, plus several journalists who'd started covering frontier politics once the Alliance and Council created an actual story to report. Chancellor Voss looked older than he had a year ago, the job clearly wearing on him. But his voice was strong when he called the session to order. 1 year ago, this council authorized a trial period for 2 competing approaches to frontier governance. The Frontier Sovereignty Alliance and the Resource Management Council have both operated for 12 months. Today we assess results objectively and determine which model better serves our territories. He paused, looking around the room. This isn't about politics or ideology. It's about evidence. Both organizations will present their data. Then we'll discuss and determine the frontier's path forward. Alpha Winters, you have the floor.
Aldrich stood, and the room's attention shifted to him immediately. He'd always had that presence, that gravity. A year hadn't diminished it. Thank you, Chancellor. The Sovereignty Alliance was founded on a simple principle, that strong, independent packs working together voluntarily create more prosperity than bureaucratic cooperation mandated from above. He distributed his presentation materials, professionally printed, exhaustively detailed, impressive. Our results speak for themselves. He walked through the data methodically. The Alliance had grown from 14 to 18 packs. Trade volumes across member territories had increased an average of 23%. Economic development projects, new infrastructure, improved facilities had been completed in 11 territories. Defense capabilities had been enhanced through coordinated training and resource sharing. Population stability was up, with 3 packs reporting growth for the first time in years. It was an impressive presentation. The numbers were real, the achievements significant. Aldrich had delivered on every promise he'd made. The alliance model works, Aldrich concluded, because it respects pack sovereignty while providing mutual support. Members maintain autonomy over their own resources and decisions. They're stronger together, but free to act independently when their interests require it. That balance between cooperation and independence is what frontier governance should provide. He sat down to genuine applause. Multiple delegates were nodding, clearly impressed. Then Voss looked at Seren. The Resource Council's presentation. Seren stood, feeling every eye in the room track the movement. She distributed her materials, not as polished as Aldrich's, but comprehensive. Real data from real implementation. The Resource Council was founded on a different principle, she began, her voice steady, that the frontier's resource problems are systemic and require systemic solutions. That competition for shared resources creates inefficiency and eventual depletion. That coordination, while harder than independence, produces better long-term outcomes. She paused. We've spent a year testing that principle. Here's what we found. She presented the water data first. 8 territories with coordinated monitoring and management. Water table decline had stopped in 6 territories, slowed significantly in 2. Compared to historical trends, that represented a complete reversal of depletion patterns. This isn't marginal improvement, Seren said, pointing to specific graphs. This is the difference between sustainable water access and eventual well failure. The Alliance territories are still experiencing water table decline, slower than before because they're using better individual management practices, but still declining. Council territories have stabilized.
That's the difference between coordinated management and independent operation. She moved to hunting data. The coordination had been rocky, but the results were clear. Game populations in council territories were recovering at an average of 5% annually. Alliance territories showed continued decline, though at reduced rates. Coordinated hunting isn't easy, Seren admitted. It requires packs to trust each other with data, to limit their own harvest for collective benefit, to think long-term instead of maximizing short-term gains. But it works. Our territories now have growing game populations instead of shrinking ones. That's food security for the next generation. Then the grain reserves. The early winter crisis had proven the concept. Council territories had weathered it with zero casualties and minimal hardship. Several alliance territories had experienced genuine suffering, with 2 reporting deaths from exposure and malnutrition among their most vulnerable members. The alliance is right that prosperity matters, Seren said quietly. But prosperity means different things. It can mean economic growth and infrastructure development. It can also mean ensuring no one starves during unexpected crises. The Resource Council chose to prioritize crisis resilience over economic expansion. Based on last winter's results, I think we chose correctly. She pulled out her final set of data, the measurement Aldrich hadn't addressed. Resource sustainability projections. The Alliance has achieved real economic growth, Seren acknowledged. Their territories are more prosperous by most traditional metrics. But that growth is being fueled by continued resource extraction at unsustainable rates. Water tables declining, game populations shrinking, soil productivity dropping. The trends we identified 2 years ago are continuing in Alliance territories, just slightly slower than before. They've bought time, but they haven't changed the trajectory. She projected the long-term numbers. At current rates, Alliance territories will face critical resource shortages in 8 to 12 years. Not speculation, mathematical extrapolation from measured trends. The economic growth they're experiencing now is borrowing from their future. Eventually, the bill comes due. Council territories have stabilized, she continued. We're not growing economically like the Alliance, but our resources are recovering instead of depleting. In 20 years, Council territories will still have water, game, and agricultural capacity. Alliance territories will be facing the same crisis we were trying to prevent. The room was very quiet. The question isn't which model produced better results this year, Seren said. The question is which model produces better results over time. The Alliance looks more successful right now because they're operating on the same assumptions that have always driven frontier politics. Maximize extraction, maintain independence, trust that resources will always be available. The Council looks less successful because we're operating on different assumptions. Resources are finite. Coordination prevents depletion. Short-term sacrifice enables long-term sustainability. She looked around the room, making eye contact with delegates who'd been watching this experiment. You have to decide what success means. Economic growth now or resource stability later. Independence with declining capacity or coordination with sustainable future. The data supports both models depending on what you value, but only one of them is still working 20 years from now. She sat down. No applause, but thoughtful silence. People processing, calculating, measuring their own territories against both models. Aldrich stood. With respect, Coordinator Vale is presenting speculation as fact. Her 20-year projections are based on assumptions that may not hold. Resources fluctuate. New territories open up. Technology improves efficiency. She's predicting crisis to justify bureaucratic control. I'm extrapolating for measured trends, Seren countered. The same math that successfully predicted current conditions 2 years ago. You can dismiss it as speculation, but the water tables don't care about your assumptions. They're dropping measurably in your territories and stable in mine. Because your territories are using less, Aldrich shot back, you've achieved sustainability by suppressing growth. That's not success. That's managed decline. We've achieved sustainability by coordinating use, Seren replied. And yes, that means individual territories use less than they could if operating independently. That's the entire point. Coordinated restraint prevents collective depletion. It's not managed decline. It's chosen sustainability over short-term maximization. The debate continued for another hour. Other delegates joined, some supporting Aldrich's emphasis on prosperity and independence, others gravitating towards Seren's sustainability arguments. It was passionate, substantive, real. Not political theater, but genuine disagreement about fundamental values. Finally, Voss called for order. We've heard extensive presentations from both organizations. The data is clear. Both models have achieved their stated goals. The alliance has produced economic growth and maintained sovereignty. The Council has achieved resource stability and crisis resilience. The question is which set of outcomes we prioritize as a frontier. He paused, looking around the room. I'm calling for a vote, but not on which organization continues. Both have proven their value. The vote is on which model becomes the recommended approach for frontier governance going forward. Non-binding, but indicative of this Council's assessment of best practices. It was a political compromise, but a fair one. Both organizations would survive, but one would have the Council's endorsement. All in favor of the Sovereignty Alliance model as recommended best practice. Hands went up. Aldrich's coalition, plus several delegates attracted to the economic results, plus PACs that valued independence above sustainability concerns. Voss counted carefully. 19 votes. All in favor of the Resource Council model. More hands. Seren's 17-member PACs, plus Rowan, plus several delegates who'd been convinced by the sustainability data, plus a few who'd watched the grain reserve response and recognized the value of crisis resilience. Voss counted again, his expression unreadable. 22 votes. The room erupted. Seren sat frozen, barely processing. 22. 3 more than the alliance. Not a mandate, not overwhelming, but a clear statement that the frontier saw value in cooperation. Aldrich's expression was stone, but she saw the fury beneath it. He'd lost. Not by much, but enough. Voss raised his hand for silence. The Council has spoken. The Resource Management Council model is recognized as recommended best practice for frontier governance. PACs remain free to choose their own approach, but this Council's assessment is that coordinated resource management serves long-term interests better than independent operation. He looked at both Seren and Aldrich. Both organizations have proven their worth. I expect both to continue operating and serving their members well. This was never about declaring a winner. It was about determining what works. We now have evidence that cooperation, while challenging, produces sustainable outcomes. That's valuable information for every PAC on the frontier. The session dissolved into chaos, delegates arguing, celebrating, protesting. Journalists rushing to file stories, PAC representatives trying to corner Seren or Aldrich for comments. Seren just sat at her place, trying to process what had just happened. She'd won. Not completely. 19 PACs had voted for the alliance model, and those votes mattered. But 22 had voted for cooperation, for sustainability over growth, for long-term thinking over short-term gain. The frontier had chosen a different path, and she'd been the one to show them it existed. Rowan appeared at her side, grinning widely. You did it. You actually did it. We did it, Seren corrected. 17 PACs chose to try something different. The data proved them right. The data proved you right, Rowan said. They took the chance because you convinced them it was worth taking. Don't diminish that. Elena and Daniel were approaching, both looking stunned and jubilant. Other council members gathering, sudden relief and validation washing over people who'd spent a year being told they were naive. But Seren's attention was caught by movement across the room. Aldrich was leaving, walking toward the exit with his shoulders rigid and his expression controlled. Their eyes met for just a moment across the crowded hall. She expected to see fury, contempt, the promise of retaliation. Instead, she saw something else. Something that might have been respect, grudging and unwilling, but present. Then he was gone, and Seren was surrounded by people congratulating her, asking questions, wanting to know what came next. What came next was the hard part, actually building on this victory, expanding the council, proving that one good year wasn't a fluke, but the beginning of real change. But that was tomorrow's challenge. Tonight, she let herself feel the weight of what they'd accomplished. The celebration continued late into the night. Council members gathering in various rooms, sharing stories about implementation challenges and successes, bonding over the shared experience of trying to make cooperation work against everyone's expectations. Seren eventually slipped away to her room, exhausted and overwhelmed. She needed quiet to process everything. She was sitting by the window, looking out at the frontier she'd helped change, when there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Marcus Thorne standing in the hallway. Her alpha looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight, clearly out of his element at the summit. But he met her eyes directly. "I came to tell you the Pack Council met this afternoon," Marcus said without preamble. "Unanimous vote. We're making your position permanent. Official Pack representative, full authority to commit Hollow Creek to council decisions, seat on our internal leadership council." He paused. "You've earned it." Seren stood very still. "Marcus, you were right," he said, cutting her off, "about cooperation, about what it takes to survive, about what matters more than pride. You were right, and I was wrong, and the Pack needs to acknowledge that." He pulled out a document, handed it to her. "It's all official, signed by every council member. You're not just representing us anymore, you're leading us." "I don't want to take your position." "I'm not offering my position. I'm still alpha. But you've proven you understand things I don't. The frontier's changing, and Hollow Creek needs someone who can navigate that change. That's you." Marcus almost smiled. "Besides, you basically run things anyway. Might as well make it official." He turned to leave, paused. "For what it's worth, Vale, I'm proud to have you in my pack. I should have said that years ago." Then he was gone, leaving Seren holding a document that fundamentally changed her status within her own pack. She read it twice, her hands shaking slightly. Recognition, authority, respect. Everything she'd wanted for years, offered because she'd stopped waiting for permission and started creating change. She set the document on her desk, next to the Hollow Creek carving Marcus had sent a year ago. Two symbols of the same truth, that worth wasn't given, it was earned. That power came from proving yourself, not from being handed position. That sometimes the rejected became essential by refusing to accept rejection. The next morning, Seren stood before the full summit for the final session. Voss had requested she address the council about the Resource Council's plans going forward. She looked out at the assembled delegates, some supportive, some hostile, many still uncertain. A year ago, she'd stood in this same spot and challenged the entire frontier power structure. Now she stood here as someone the frontier had acknowledged, validated, chosen. "Thank you for the opportunity to speak," she began. "The Resource Council will continue operating as we have been, coordinating resource management, building crisis resilience, proving that cooperation works in practice. But we're also expanding our mission." She pulled out new proposals. "We're establishing a frontier-wide data sharing network. Any pack can contribute resource monitoring data and access the collective information. We're creating a crisis response fund, voluntary contributions that can be deployed when any frontier pack faces disaster, member or not. And we're offering technical assistance to any territory interested in implementing cooperative resource management, regardless of whether they join the council formally." "Why help packs that aren't members?" someone asked. "Because the frontier's problems don't respect organizational boundaries," Seren replied. "If Alliance territories experience resource collapse, it affects everyone. We're not trying to prove the council is superior, we're trying to prevent the crisis we all saw coming 2 years ago. If sharing our methods helps achieve that, then we share them." It was a gamble, offering cooperation's benefits to packs that hadn't joined. But it was also the point. Cooperation worked because it made everyone stronger, not just the participants. The session ended with surprising consensus. Even delegates who'd voted for the Alliance model acknowledged the value of data sharing and crisis response capabilities. Aldrich was notably absent. He'd left the summit early that morning, returning to his coalition territories, making his displeasure known through absence rather than argument. But several Alliance members approached Seren privately, asking about the technical assistance program, inquiring whether packs could participate in data sharing without fully joining the council. The wall between the two approaches was already starting to erode. That afternoon, as delegates prepared to return to their territories, Seren stood in the summit courtyard watching people leave. A year ago, she'd arrived here invisible and powerless. Now people stopped to talk to her, to ask questions, to seek her opinion. "Enjoying your moment?" Rowan asked, appearing beside her. "Trying to figure out if it's real," Seren admitted. "It's real. You changed the frontier's direction. That's not a small thing. I gave them an option. They chose to take it. Because you made it possible to take." Rowan looked at her seriously. "You know what comes next is going to be harder, right? You've won legitimacy, which means people will expect results. The council isn't an experiment anymore. It's an established institution that has to deliver on its promises." "I know." Good, Rowan smiled. Because watching you prove everyone wrong has been the most interesting thing that's happened on this frontier in decades. I'd hate for you to get boring now. He walked away, and Seren was left alone with her thoughts. The frontier stretched before her, still harsh, still unforgiving, but different now. Changed by the choice to try cooperation. Changed by the willingness to think long-term instead of maximizing short-term gain. Changed by 17 packs who'd been brave enough to trust each other. Changed by an Omega from a dying pack who'd refused to accept that power was the only thing that mattered. Seren thought about the journey that had brought her here. The rejection from Aldrich that had felt like the end of everything. The humiliation of sitting invisible at the summit table. The fear when she'd first challenged the established order. The exhaustion of implementation. The doubt during the hard months when cooperation seemed impossible. All of it had been necessary. All of it had shaped what came next. She wasn't the same person who'd arrived here a year ago. That Seren had been afraid of her own voice, convinced her ideas didn't matter, willing to accept invisibility as her permanent state. This Seren knew her worth, knew her ideas had value, knew that speaking truth mattered more than knowing your place. The rejection that had broken her had also freed her from seeking validation from people who'd never see her value. Freed her from accepting limits others tried to impose. Freed her to become someone who created change instead of accepting circumstances. She pulled out the letter from Marcus, read it one more time. Official recognition from her own pack, offered because she'd stopped waiting for it and started earning it. The frontier was changing. The Resource Council would grow. More packs would choose cooperation. The sustainability model would spread. But the real change, the one that mattered most, had already happened. She'd changed. Transformed from someone who accepted rejection to someone who proved her worth despite it. And in doing so, she'd shown every dismissed, invisible, powerless wolf on the frontier that power came in forms the alphas didn't recognize. That intelligence mattered, that courage counted, that sometimes the weakest became the strongest by refusing to accept weakness as permanent. Seren looked out at the frontier she'd helped reshape and smiled. Let them try to dismiss her now. Let them try to tell her she didn't belong. Let them try to put her back in the box labeled Omega from a dying pack who doesn't matter. She'd proven them wrong once. She'd do it again as many times as necessary, because she'd learned the most important lesson the frontier could teach, that rejection was only the end if you accepted it as final. And Seren Vale had stopped accepting limits the day she stood up and spoke truth to power. The frontier would never be the same, neither would she. And that, she thought, as the sun set over the summit complex one final time, was exactly as it should be. Worth wasn't given. It was earned. Power wasn't granted. It was claimed. And change didn't come from accepting the world as it was. It came from having the courage to imagine it could be different, and the determination to make that imagination real. Seren turned away from the courtyard and headed toward the stables. 17 packs were waiting for her to help make cooperation work. A frontier was waiting to see if sustainability could really replace extraction. A future was waiting to be built. She'd proven cooperation was possible. Now she had to prove it was permanent. But that was tomorrow's challenge. Tonight, she'd earned the right to rest. The rejected Omega had become essential, and the frontier would never forget it.